Chapter 13. Cassie didn't do this. It has to be a coincidence. Nick frowned. I don't know, Holly. Between the testimony about the heated argument and the shoes, it seems pretty damning. They'll probably get a search warrant and look through her house for signs of more syrup and blood. There has to be another explanation. I shook my head slowly, trying to process everything Nick was dumping onto me. My eyes flashed to him. Why are you trying to help me prove she's innocent? You're like a cop, so that means you think she did it too, right? Nick shook his head, and then shrugged. I don't know. I don't like to jump to conclusions. That's why I wanted to come here myself and see what I could find. The first answer isn't always the right one. In fact, from my experience, it's rarely the right one. How long have you been a PI? About 4 years, he said, scratching his jaw. I went to college in California in hopes of becoming a big-time, first-on-the-scene kind of news reporter. You know, right there in the action, the face people look to when there's a crisis. He paused, a flurry of memories dancing behind his eyes. Anyway, I got my degree in journalism and made sure to take a whole heap of broadcasting and communications courses. After I graduated, I spent 10 years working for a small paper in L.A., waiting for my big break in the City of Angels. Cheesy, huh? I shook my head. No, not at all. Nick gave me a soft smile. Well, it turned out to be a big waste of time. The most exciting story I ever covered was a ring of shoplifting housewives from Beverly Hills. What on earth were they shoplifting? Diamonds and solid gold coins? Women in Beverly Hills wanted for nothing. I couldn't imagine them resorting to shoplifting. Nick laughed. No, that was the weird part. Everything was really simple. Clothes, cheap jewelry, boxes of cookies from grocery stores. It was surreal. When they got busted, they said they did it for the thrill. Wow. What did they call them? Kleptos in stilettos? Nick dropped his head back and laughed, the sound filling the small office. I smiled, begrudgingly admitting to myself that I liked the way he laughed. And even more, I liked being the one who made him laugh. Kleptos in stilettos. I like that. If I ever write a book, that'll be the title. Happy to help? All I ask is for my name to appear on the dedication page. Nick grinned like a happy golden retriever. You got it. So how did that story make you jump from reporting to being a PI? I asked, picking up the thread of his story again. We'd been at Siren song for a long time. I was starting to get nervous that someone would report the ruckus in the alley following Adam's quick exit. The last thing we needed was Chief Lincoln showing up. Right. Nick rubbed the back of his neck. There wasn't anything about that story in particular. It was more a culmination of all the other lame stories I'd covered in my career. The last straw, I guess. I remember sitting at my desk, and it hit me right between the eyes. I could see it all so clearly. If I stayed at the paper, that was what my legacy would be. Half-page spreads on Beverly Hills soccer moms who got bored and went on a misdemeanor crime spree. I mean, they were out of the slammer 2 hours later. It was so nothing. Like cotton candy. I nodded. That makes sense. One of the perks of working at a small paper is you do all your own fact-checking, running down leads. And over time, I made connections at the local police station. I knew all of the officers, and we had a rapport with each other. One of them suggested I get into PI work if I wanted a bigger piece of the action, so that's what I did. It's odd how similar it is to reporting. You still have to identify the key players, get to know them, track down leads, shake a lot of trees to get information. Then you sit down and try to piece it all together and it starts to fit, and the story unfolds naturally. You make it sound so easy, I said, grinning at him. I don't mean to, it's not easy. I've had a few cases that I couldn't crack, but those years spent working for the paper definitely helped. And this was all in L.A.? The first 4 years, yeah. I moved up here to get a little peace and quiet. The city was getting too loud. I cocked my head. But what made you pick a small town like Beechwood Harbor? Sure, it's all exciting right now, what with the murder, but normally, the biggest scoop you're going to find here is idle small-town gossip about who's on the rocks, who's hooking up, or what's on sale down at Thistle. Nick laughed. Thistle? The natural food store. Ah. To answer your question, a few months ago I was working on a runaway case. A couple hired me to find their 19-year-old daughter. The police wouldn't touch it because she was legally an adult, and there were no signs of foul play. My trail of clues led me here, and I guess I just kind of fell in love with it. It's a beautiful town, and a drastic change from L.A., which is exactly what I wanted. I'm not normally an impulsive guy, but on my way out, once the case was solved, I saw a rental sign and figured, what the heck? And on the plus side, there's a spooky house that the neighbors like to talk about, I quipped, glancing down at my boots. That's not what... You're a complicated man, Nick. Reporter, PI, and paranormal tour guide to the delusional and paranoid. He reared back, his expression quickly shifting from casual to irritated. Delusional and paranoid? Ouch. I shrugged. It is what it is. Vampires and ghosts don't really exist. What next? You'll start hunting for witches? Maybe toss a few into the river and see if they float or drown? Nick flexed his jaw, his temples pulsing with the effort. I'm just here to help, Holly. I'm not throwing anyone into the river. Where is all this coming from? You should have stayed in L.A., Nick. There's nothing for you here. I pushed past him and didn't stop walking until I got back to the front porch of the manor. Holly! I turned at the harsh whisper and found Adam's head poking out from the shrubs that flanked each side of the porch. Adam! What are you doing? I don't have my keys. My clothes, wallet, and keyring are back in the alley. Oh! My eyebrows went up, realizing that Adam was hiding in the bushes because instead of wearing his beast form, he was wearing his birthday suit. No one would let you in? He sighed. Well, Posey can't, and the Princess of Darkness is out tonight. Not that I'd give her the ammo of finding me stark naked on the porch. She'd never let me hear the end of it. I curled my lips in to stifle a laugh. Okay, I have my key. I'll be right back. I hurried inside the house and went to the sitting room off the entry. I grabbed the first throw blanket my hand found in the dark. When I turned to go back to the door, I tripped over a very large, solid tabby. Boots! I hissed. He howled, and then launched into a series of increasingly irritated meows. Yes, I know. Stop lecturing me. I know it's late. Believe me, I want to be in bed as much as you want me to be there, you little body heat leech. I scooted him into action with the toe of my boot, and he ambled down the hall. I'll be there in a minute. Go warm up the sheets. It's truly the least you could do. Cats, I muttered to myself, balling up the blanket into a tight basketball form. I stepped back onto the porch and chucked the blanket in the direction of Adam's voice. He growled as the blanket hit the target. And dogs! Another growl. I waited as Adam got situated and appeared in the stream of light from the porch lights. He was wearing the blanket around his waist and a scowl on his handsome face. I kept my eyes locked with his, refusing to let them drop lower and inspect his sinewy muscles and broad chest. Okay, so maybe I peeked a little while he was securing the knot at his waist. I look like a Scotsman, he said, glancing at the blanket. This is the best thing you could find? I rolled my eyes. What are you now, Mr. GQ? Get in here. You have an entire closet of clothes. He sauntered up the steps and waited for me to enter the manor before coming inside. I pushed the door closed and bolted it. You're starting to sound like Lacey. I'm just saying, plaid isn't my thing. I surrendered to a bubble of laughter. How did I become the sane one in this house? Trust me, you're not, Adam retorted, sweeping past me to the foot of the grand staircase. Hey, where do you think you're going? I need to know what happened back there. I was going to put some clothes on first. He spun around, and my eyes flashed over his bare chest. Or would you prefer me this way, gorgeous? I scoffed. my smile quickly fading into a scowl. "Don't flatter yourself. Go change. I'll put on a kettle." He stomped up the stairs, and I went into the kitchen, carefully erasing the memory of his muscles from my mind. That was 2 close calls in one night. First the offhanded comment about Nick's cologne, and now gawking at Adam half-naked wearing a blanket/kilt. What was happening to me? Whatever it wasn't good. I was purposefully single, and planning to keep it that way. My life was far too unpredictable to settle down and fall in love, and being casual had never been my style. As a witch, my magic was tied to my emotions, and it took a while to rebalance once something disturbed my heart, whether good or bad. It just wasn't worth it. I learned that lesson a while ago. I shook the thoughts from my mind and went to work on a kettle of tea. Something soothing. Chamomile? But with what? I was still weighing my options when the kitchen door opened. Adam, now fully dressed, strode across the room and plopped down at the head of the table. 2 seconds later, before he could get comfortable, he sprang back up and went to his snack cabinet. He retrieved his trusty jar of peanut butter, a sleeve of crackers from a box, and a banana from the counter. He grabbed a butter knife and then carried the haul back to the table and went to work making little sandwiches. "How can you be hungry?" I asked, marveling at him from my place at the stove. I laid a hand across my own stomach. Between McNally's fish and chips and the triple scoop from Sprinkles and Splits, I was about to burst. Adam didn't share that feeling. By the time the tea kettle sang, he'd crafted 10 miniature sandwiches and stacked them on the table in front of him. "Snacking relaxes me," I snorted. "All right, then. So what in the other world was all that back at the coffee shop?" he asked, turning in his chair. One of his elbows dipped over the back, and his other hand lifted the first cracker sandwich to his lips. He devoured it in one bite. "That was Nick Rivers. The PI? The paranormal investigator?" Adam snarled. I nodded. "Well, yes and no. He does both. He's a classic PI, cheating husbands, runaway kids, stolen jewelry, that kind of thing. And then he does the paranormal tours on the side." Adam rolled his eyes. "So let me get this straight. Not only is he after our kind, but he knows what he's doing, too? Awesome." I sighed miserably. Adam was right. Most paranormal tours were pure nonsense, led by self-proclaimed experts who wouldn't recognize a sprite or troll if it kicked them in the shins and wore a name tag. I wasn't sure how much accurate information Nick had about paranormal creatures and beings, but he had skills with tracking and investigating that could prove to be a real risk if he realized there was a nest of paranormals residing in Beechwood Harbor. The results could be staggering, especially since I'd already run out of relocation options. I turned off the burner and moved the kettle away from the heat. I poured water into the 2 cups I had set off to the side of the stove on the small slice of counter between it and the fridge. Once filled, I brought the 2 cups to the table and slid one in front of Adam before taking the seat beside him. "He saw you," I said softly. Adam nodded, his jaw going stiff. "I know. That's why I abandoned my clothes and ran off. I circled back, but still caught his scent, so I came back here to wait for you. I didn't think you'd take so long." He flashed me a dark look. "What were you doing?" "I had to see what I could find, Adam. Nick said—" My voice carried off, remembering the cold words I'd thrown at him before storming out of the shop. "He said that the cops found a pair of Cassie's shoes in a dumpster, not far from the crime scene. They were covered in peppermint syrup. From the alley." Adam drew in a breath and released it in a forceful puff. "That's not good." "Not at all. Peg was bludgeoned with a bottle of the vile stuff." He made a distasteful face. "Crime of passion or heat of the moment?" "Wish I knew. Did you pick up any other scents?" I twisted my cup around in a small circle, the contents still too hot to drink. "Before Nick ran you off, I mean." "Nothing that helps. I smelled straw, the peppermint, and blood. Straw? Adam nodded. Yeah, like hay. Not a lot, but there was an undertone. Maybe someone tracked it in on their shoes? I guess. Beechwood Harbor was a coastal town, but the beach was only a small slice of the landscape. Most people didn't live by the ocean. Inland was more rural. A lot of green space with timberlines, wetlands, and small farms made up the majority of it. It wasn't far-fetched that someone could have tracked in hay or straw from their farm. I thought back to the legal papers and wondered if Philip Tanner lived on a farm. Of everything I'd gathered so far, he had shot up heads and shoulders above the rest of the suspects on my list. Finding out more about him, including whether or not he lived on horse property, would be a good place to start. Listen, thanks for coming with me tonight, Adam. I had fun, all things considered. Me too, Holly. Adam held my gaze for a long moment before I cleared my throat and pushed up from the table. You gonna finish your tea? I glanced down, having forgotten about it entirely. Something about the dark look in Adam's eye had thrown me off track. I'll take it with me. Boots is waiting for his bedtime treat. If I make him wait much longer, I'll have a tiny mutiny on my hands. Tiny? The only thing tiny about that cat is his brains. Hey! I narrowed my eyes at him as I gathered up my teacup. Adam laughed and popped another cracker sandwich into his mouth. Night, Holly. Send my love to the furball. Chapter 14. The following morning, I woke up to the sound of my cell phone ringing, its twinkly little ringtone breaking through my twisted and confusing dreams. I opened my heavy lids to find an orange tail swishing across my face. As the tail swooped back around, I spat out and brushed my face free of the dusting of cat fur. Boots! I shoved his chunky rear end off of my chest and rolled over just as the phone started ringing again. My heart jolted into a frantic pace at the name on the caller ID. Cassie? I answered, pushing the phone up against my tangled hair. Hi, Holly, she started, her voice tiny and thin. I'm really sorry to call so early. The bedroom was dark, except for the light from the screen. I flicked with my other hand and sent a small orb of light into the air, then rolled over to check the time on the small, old-fashioned alarm clock beside my bed. It was a little after 5:30. I blinked a few times, clearing the sleep from my eyes. It's okay, Cass. What's going on? Are you okay? Cassie started to speak, but the words fell apart and dissolved into sobs before I could figure out what she was talking about. I bolted upright in bed, and Boots gave me a disgruntled look, having just resituated himself beside me. He stuck his tail straight up in the air and waddled off to the other side of the queen-size bed. Cassie, where are you? I'm at home, she said, around another miserable wail. I can't sleep, and I thought you might be awake since normally you'd be on your way to the shop by now. She sniffled, and a surge of pity and anger ran through me, crashing together in my chest. I'm awake, Cassie. Do you want me to come over? No, you don't have to do that. I just needed to talk to someone. All these horrible thoughts are going around inside my head, and I think I'm going crazy. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, sending the covers flying over the top of Boots. The floor was cool under my bare feet, and I hurried to swap out my cotton shorts for a pair of jeans while I kept the phone pinched between my cheek and my shoulder. I'll be there in 15 minutes, Cass. I'll bring some breakfast, okay? A pitiful sniffle tugged on my heart. Thanks, Holly. You're the best. We hung up, and I scrambled to get ready. As I was walking out the front door, I realized that with Siren's song closed, there were limited options for getting hot coffee and something that would work for a quick breakfast on the fly. I hurried through town and made a quick stop at Thistle, the small, all-natural market, surprised to find them open so early. They had hot coffee available in their deli department. Nothing fancy, but it would do the trick. I also grabbed a few rolls, hot and fresh, and a container of jam before paying and heading over to Cassie's. As I approached her family's home, I saw her under the porch light, sitting on the wooden porch swing. She told me once that her father built it for her mother before his accident. It was probably the nicest thing they owned. I waved as I made my way up the small walkway of bricks that were mostly dominated by unkempt grass that sprouted up between them. She had a thick blanket tucked around her legs and was bundled in a thick hooded sweatshirt. The sky was only starting to brighten. Cassie lifted a corner of the blanket for me and patted the seat beside her as I approached. "Hi, Holly." "Hey." I sat down and handed her one of the 2 cardboard cups before reaching for the paper bag tucked under my arm. I opened the bag for her to look inside. "I got some rolls, too, and they smell amazing." She smiled as I rummaged through the small paper bag and laid out our simple breakfast. "Thanks. That was really sweet of you." "No problem." I took a deep sip from my own cup of coffee. It was bold and strong and perked me up. "So, tell me what's going on." She dropped her gaze to the roll in her lap and tore off a chunk. "Chief Lincoln and his officers think that I killed Peg." "I thought we went over this, Cass. He's just following the clues right now. He has to ask questions of anyone who might know something. He doesn't think you did it." I gulped, hoping my words sounded more convincing than they felt. Cassie shook her head. "He came back over yesterday. He had his deputy with him, and they asked to go through my room." "What?" My heart kicked out a frantic rhythm, like a kid jamming on a drum set. Cassie nodded. "They found a pair of shoes in the dumpster. They had peppermint syrup all over them. Frankie told them they were my shoes and that I was wearing them that night, before the murder." I grimaced. "Were you?" Cassie flicked a glance at me, and then nodded slowly. Her expression twisted, pained. "Yeah, they were my blue high tops." "Why did you throw them out at work?" It was a question I'd wrestled with since Nick told me about the shoes the night before. Cassie groaned. "It was stupid. After the argument with Peg, I went outside and took the trash with me. That's what I'd been doing when she called me into her office to accuse me of stealing." Cassie paused and flexed her jaw. "Anyway, the trash bag busted right as I went to throw it out. Old milk, coffee grounds, syrup, leftover drinks, all of it. All down my front and, of course, all over my shoes." I pulled a face. Ick. I was so angry about Peg and the trash and everything else. I had a pair of flip-flops in my car, so I tore off those old shoes and chucked them right into the dumpster closest to where I'd parked. I nodded. It all made sense. But talk about bad timing for a bargain trash bag to go kersplat. "I told Jeffrey what happened, and he looked around and didn't find anything. I think he believed me. At least I thought he did." "What do you mean? Did something else happen?" Cassie nodded and popped another bite in her mouth. "Last night, I went into town to get groceries, and I noticed one of his deputies on my tail. He has someone following me." My eyes snapped open wide. "What?" "Yeah. He didn't even bother with an unmarked car." She shook her head, her delicate nostrils flaring. "I can't believe he's doing any of this. What's next? He hauls me down to the station to interrogate me like someone on a cop show?" I was at a loss for words. I didn't know how it all worked, mostly because in the supernatural world things were different. If you were suspected of a crime, an SPA agent would drag you in and use magic to make you talk. Besides, where am I going to go? Even if it was me, I couldn't just up and leave town. I have to take care of my pops and Kira. Cassie dragged in a long breath. "Anyway, that's where things stand." "I'm sorry, Cass." She nodded sadly. "Me too. I don't even know what to tell Kira and my pops. I mean, they know it wasn't me. But I just can't bring myself to even tell them about the argument with Peg, or the $500 she thought I stole, or any of it. It's all like a nightmare that I can't wake up from. It'll be over soon. It has to be." "I hope you're right." We finished our coffees and nibbled at the rolls. After a long while, Cassie turned to me. "What about you? Are you all right?" I glanced up from my empty cup of coffee and forced a smile for Cassie's sake. I'm all right. I just didn't get a lot of sleep last night. I'll bet. Cassie shuddered. I can't imagine it was easy being the one to find her like that. I don't even want to think about it. I don't blame you. Before I could think of a way to navigate us to a cheerier topic, a car pulled down the street that made both of us sit up straighter. No way, I breathed, my heart hammering away. Cassie stiffened beside me and cursed under her breath. I couldn't remember her ever swearing before. I glanced over at her. Her eyes narrowed in the direction of the black sedan cruising down the street. The car rolled to a stop in front of the house, and Chief Lincoln appeared as the window lowered. He glanced at each of us. Morning, ladies. What do you want, Jeffrey? Cassie scowled and folded her arms over her chest. Her sass surprised me. Chief Lincoln certainly had an effect on her. I had a feeling that was true even before this unfortunate investigation had begun. I'm just on my way to the station. Cassie rolled her eyes. And decided to cruise through my neighborhood? What is this, the scenic route? Chief Lincoln frowned. I'm just doing my job, Cassie. Can you please understand that? No, I can't. Now go away. Chief Lincoln gave each of us a hard stare, but did as she asked. He rolled the window back up, pulled away from the curb, and drove off into the hazy morning. The screen door banged open, and Kira, Cassie's younger sister, strode out, wearing flannel pajama bottoms and a white shirt with a local dune buggy shop's logo on the front. What was that all about? Nothing, Cassie said, shooting me a pleading glance. What are you doing up so early? Kira was enrolled at the community college, but had arranged her schedule so that she didn't have any classes that started before noon. She came over and took the coffee cup from Cassie's hand, and pouted when she found it was empty. I just got off the phone with Frankie. At this hour? I asked, looking from Cassie to Kira, puzzled. Kira nodded. He said he got a call from the new owner of Siren's song. Apparently, he wants to gather everyone to talk about the reopening. I blew out a puff of air. Wow, that was fast. No kidding. Cassie glanced up at Kira. Who is he? The new owner. Kira shrugged. Frankie didn't say. He must be a family member or something, Cassie said. It's not like they had time to sell the place. Yeah, but if he's a family member, why would he be in such a hurry to reopen? Wouldn't he be grieving? Cassie and Kira both nodded, but none of us had any answers. Anyway, you guys free? Kira asked. What time is the meeting supposed to start? I asked. Half an hour? Kira replied, her tone grumpy. This was obviously cutting into her sleeping time, and she wasn't happy about it. Cassie sighed and untangled herself from the blanket. Guess we don't have a choice. Probably not, I agreed, kicking free of my half of the thick fabric. Kira slipped back inside the house to go get ready, and Cassie excused herself to go take a quick shower. I'll see you there, Holly. Thanks again for breakfast and coming over. You're the best. I smiled, her words meaning more to me than she could possibly understand. No problem. See you soon. With both of the girls inside, I gathered the trash from our simple meal and headed over to Siren's song to wait for everyone else to arrive for the meeting. From across the street, I could see that the police tape was still posted over the entrance to the alley. There were lights on inside, so I crossed the street and went in to find Paisley and Frankie already waiting. They were both in their early 20s. Frankie was tall and lanky, with dark hair, caramel skin, and a wide, friendly smile for anyone he met. Paisley was a good foot shorter than Frankie, with bright blue eyes and a short blonde pixie cut. Hey, Holly, Paisley greeted. Frankie was beside her, one arm draped over her shoulders. Morning. I followed my nose to the carafe behind the counter. Bless you, you made coffee. Frankie and Paisley laughed. Of course. I don't know why this guy insisted on us getting here so early. No kidding, Paisley quipped. Not a great way to make a first impression. I would automatically like him more if he had the decency to wait until after 10 for company meetings to begin. I laughed and filled my favorite tumbler with a stream of black coffee. The bell of the front door chimed, and I whipped around, expecting to see the new owner. But instead, Cassie and Kira pushed inside. Everyone called out another round of greetings. Cassie went to get a cup of coffee for them as Kira raided the day-old pastries from the fridge in the back room. After that, an awkward silence filled the room, making the mood heavy and dark. None of us wanted to talk about Peg, but being in the shop, surrounded by her memory, it was impossible to think of anything else. I cleared my throat. "Hey, Frankie, who was it that called you? Did you get a name?" "He said his name is Philip Tanner." My eyes widened as a frostbite cold fist punched me in the stomach. Philip Tanner? The person that I considered to be at the top of my personal suspect list for Peg's murder was also my new boss? Chapter 15. Philip Tanner made his grand entrance minutes later and addressed the group of us with a stern eye, as though sizing each of us up individually. A shiver of apprehension ran through me when his cold blue eyes landed on mine. He was a tall man, probably close to 6.5 feet tall. His head was bald and shiny, and his face was just as closely shaved. He wore a business suit that looked like it was about a size too big for him. I wasn't sure if he was a terrible shopper or if the jacket had fit at one point and he'd lost weight recently. In any case, despite the ill-fitted suit, he was clearly a businessman, complete with cufflinks, a cobalt tie that made his eyes even more icy and intimidating, and an expensive-looking watch on his wrist.
"My name is Philip Tanner, and I am the new owner of this coffee shop. This place is losing me money every day that it sits vacant. We're going to fix that. I need all of you here tomorrow morning, early. We're going to clean this place up, order new product, and get ready to open in time for the weekend."
He scanned the group of us again, as though waiting for objections. When he was satisfied that there would be no dissension, he continued.
"I run 10 shops just like this one over in Idaho. I know what I'm doing. You will all follow my lead. Now quickly, give me your names, positions, and employment status. You."
He jerked his chin at me, and my heart raced.
"Start us off."
I squared my shoulders. "I'm Holly Bolt. I'm a barista, and I'm learning how to receive new orders. I'm full-time, and I've been here for 4 months.
"Good."
He let his eyes rake over my face for another long moment before dragging them to Cassie, who was standing beside me.
"You?"
Cassie looked like a wilted flower left without water for too long under the summer sun. "I'm Cassie. I'm a barista too, and I do all incoming orders and helped Peg with the schedule. I've been here for 3 years, and I work full-time as well." Philip eyed her, and then moved on to run through the rest, Frankie, Paisley, and Kira, all part-time baristas. When everyone finished their brief introductions, he returned his gaze to Cassie.
"You been here the longest? Were you second in command? The assistant manager?"
"Well, Peg never liked titles." Cassie drifted off, and I knew she was struggling to find her words. Peg's refusal to promote her was a hot spot between the two of them. With the murder investigation already getting too close to her, she was clearly being cautious about publicly bringing up any disgruntlements between her and Peg.
"All right. Well, Peg's not here anymore."
I balked at Philip's gruff tone. I had no idea how he was connected to Peg, other than the fact that prior to her death he had been in the process of suing her, but it would seem that they had shared some personal connection at one point in time. If there had ever been a friendship, or something more, between them, it was clearly gone now. Philip folded his arms and pinned us with another hard stare.
"I happen to like titles. A chain of command is imperative. I won't be here often. As I said, I have my own series of shops in Idaho. So, Cassie, was it?"
"Yes, sir."
"You're the manager now. I'll draw up the formal paperwork and we will discuss pay and duties before I leave next week."
All the part-timers swiveled their heads to congratulate her, but Cassie couldn't seem to find a smile. She nodded and kept her gaze fixed on her clasped hands. If Philip noticed, he didn't let on, just barreled through a detailed list of his plans.
Tomorrow morning I will expect you all here at 6. That's a.m., folks. Got it?
We all nodded, and a chorus of yes sirs rumbled through. Philip clapped his hands, and we were dismissed. He disappeared into the back room, and I wondered if the police knew he was here. Wasn't the office still part of the investigation? Surely a businessman like Philip would have cleared it with the police before opening the business again. But the police tape was still blocking the alley. The whole thing felt odd and rushed. He was obviously prepared to march right along, as though a tragedy hadn't occurred a dozen feet from the front door. Outside, the sun was out, and the day was already starting to warm up, bathing us all in balmy air that carried the smell of the sea, and the reminder that summer would be here soon. Since arriving, I'd been warned that summer was when things would really kick up into a frenzy in the sleepy little town. Tourists and out-of-towners would flock to the peaceful slice of the shore, and the surrounding shops and restaurants would become inundated with customers. This same thought appeared to be on Frankie's mind as well.
At least he seems to know what he's doing. He can make sure we're all up and running by the time the tourists roll in.
Paisley nodded her agreement. Good thing, too. I count on my summer tip money to get me through the winter. Kira linked her arm through her sister's before chiming in her 2 cents. Us too. We have to sock it away like a couple of squirrels. She smiled at Cassie, waiting for her to pile on, but Cassie didn't even lift her eyes from the sidewalk in front of her. Kira frowned and released her arm. Well, see you guys later? Since I'm already awake, I'm going to the beach to soak up some of this sun before class. She threw her arms out wide and tipped her freckled face up to the sunshine. When the rest of us reached the end of the sidewalk, Paisley and Frankie, whom most people assumed to be a couple, started off one way and waved back to Cassie and me before crossing the street.
See you guys tomorrow morning. That's a.m., people,
Frankie said, grinning after delivering his impression of our new boss. I snorted, although I wasn't sure if Philip Tanner was a good target for mocking, especially if my hunch about him turned out to be true. If he knew that he would get Siren's song in the event of Peg's death, it made a pretty good case, in my opinion, to prove his motive. And if he was from Idaho, it was entirely possible he lived on a ranch or horse property. He didn't dress like a cattle farmer, but that didn't mean much. He could run it purely for the profit. When done right, it could be quite lucrative. How had it happened? Had he come to town to speak with Peg? Or maybe to meet for mediations or an arbitration to close the lawsuit? Maybe he was already losing in court and decided to show up in person to rattle her cage a little. Then things got heated. He used a weapon of convenience, that putrid peppermint syrup bottle, and that was it. It made sense, to a point. Especially if the connection that tied him to Peg in the first place was a love relationship gone sour. Peg wasn't married. As far as I knew, she'd never been married. Maybe Philip was her first love? Or an old flame? Perhaps they'd opened the shop together as a couple, and then when they split, they divided it up. The lawsuit paperwork seemed to have originated from a dispute over profit shares. The only problem was proving it. So far, nothing was concrete. I knew that if I had any chance of getting something concrete, I had 2 choices. Magic or Nick. Neither were options I particularly wanted to mess with. As a witch, I used magic all the time, but it was always for small things. Light orbs in dark places, mixing up potions to sell to other supernaturals, making charms to keep me from forgetting or losing things. Magic shields to keep my roommates from killing each other. All of it was perfectly innocent and mostly harmless. But using my powers to dig into a murder investigation? It didn't feel right. Then there was the second option. I didn't want to ask Nick for help. And honestly, after the way I stormed out the night before, there was a good chance he would turn me down even if I did swallow my pride long enough to ask. I shook my head. I needed some time to think. As soon as I got back to the manor, I would scoop up boots and go out to the greenhouse. That was always the best place to get some thinking done. Cassie and I walked in silence, both of us working through our own thoughts. We stopped when we got to the end of the block and waited for a passing car to go by. Before we started across, I nudged her with my shoulder. "Hey, what you thinking about over there? You look a little out of it. Aren't you happy about the promotion? It's what you always wanted, isn't it?" Cassie shrugged. "Who knows how long I'll have it? If Philip finds out that I'm the main suspect in Pig's murder..." If you ask me, he didn't seem all that upset about her death. Also, being a suspect and being the one who did it are two very different things. You know you didn't do it. So do I. And Chief Lincoln will come around. Cassie nodded, but her expression let on that she was far from convinced. "It's just crazy how fast things can change, you know?" "Agreed." I sighed heavily. I still can't believe I've been in Beechwood Harbor for 6 months. I feel like I'm just getting settled. Cassie's brow furrowed as she glanced over at me. "Are you happy here?" "Sure. I like it here. And I'm happy to be making friends." I smiled at her. "But sometimes it seems like I'm an outsider just looking in, you know?" Well, Beechwood Harbor is like a lot of small towns, I guess. Everyone knows everyone, and it's kind of like a clique from high school." She laughed softly. "Did your school have those?" I nodded. "Somewhat." The truth was, inside the Haven system, there was a pecking order between the different kinds of supernatural beings. Witches and wizards tended to be at the top of the food chain because they usually had the most magic. And in the supernatural world, magic was power, and power always leads to status. "You'll find your way. Maybe it would help you to get your own place. You know, a little rental house. There's a few down closer to the shore that might be nice." I shook my head. "No, I like the manor." This time she flashed a genuine smile. "You sure you don't just like Adam?" I laughed, caught off guard by her blunt comment. "Pretty sure the cheap rent, access to a greenhouse, and the killer view are the perks of living at the manor. Why wasn't there a spell to keep cheeks from reddening? Blush away drops or something? Maybe I should work on that." Cassie grinned and nudged me with her elbow. "Right. Then why did you go on a date with him?" I stopped in my tracks. "What?" Cassie giggled. "You forget the gossip in this town is more constant than the tide." I rolled my eyes. "Simone, my neighbor, saw the two of you out at McNally's and then walking around town with matching ice cream cones." "Wow, she certainly has an eye for the details," I said, my tone dry, as I remembered our shared love of mint chocolate chip. "Well, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but it wasn't a date." All right, Holly. Whatever you say." I laughed and shook my head. This place really is something else. "Get used to it, Tootsie Pop. You're stuck with us now," she said, her eyes sparkling. She had no idea how true that statement really was. "Well, this is my stop," she said, jerking her chin in the direction of the entrance to her neighborhood. "I won't make you go the whole way for the second time today." I laughed. "All right. Well, tell Creamsicle hi for me, and I'll see you in the morning." Cassie deepened her voice. "That's A.M. "Right." We laughed together and then went our separate ways. Cassie walked down her street, and I continued on up the hill to where the manor stood watch over the harbor below. I wasn't lying about the view being one of my favorite things about life at the manor. I stopped to catch my breath at the top, silently reminding myself to find a gym within walking distance, as there tragically wasn't a potion for physical fitness, and took in the sweeping scenery. The ocean was deep blue, with white-capped waves rolling in against the brown sugar sand. The Pacific Northwest was far from tropical, but the natural, rugged beauty more than made up for the lack of palm trees and coconuts. Elemental witches draw a lot of their magic from the elements, and I'd never lived anywhere else that filled me with such a strong, sure sense of my own abilities and powers. It just felt right. Which was another reason why I wasn't willing to leave Beechwood Harbor. I was determined to make it work here. I turned to go inside, my stomach ready for something more substantial than a roll, and I knew Boots would start his begging parade shortly as well, as I'd left without setting out his kibble. But as soon as I set my foot on the first step leading to the porch, I knew something was horribly wrong. Chapter 16. The planks of wood that made up the stairs were in full rebellion. As soon as my shoe touched down on the step, I was bucked backwards 3 feet, stumbling to right myself before I landed in a heap on the front yard. "Ah! Bat wings!" I bellowed. "Posy!" A window on the second floor creaked open, and Adam stuck his head out. "Holly? What's going on?" Before I could answer, the entire house shook, as though there were a centralized earthquake occurring right under the foundation. I whipped around to check the perimeter of the house, thankful that we weren't smack dab in the middle of the nearby subdivision. It would be a little hard to conceal the miniature earthquake. "The house won't let me in. What happened?" I asked, turning my attention back to Adam. He sighed. "Lacey spilled the beans about the paranormal investigator. Posy's, well, let's just say she's not taking it well." "Oh, for the love..." I rolled my eyes. "Can you tell her to come down? I'll explain everything." "You can't come up?" I pursed my lips and marched back to the steps. I lifted my foot and set it down, only to be blasted back again, this time with more of a punch. Adam reeled back. "What in the world?" Apparently this was a new party trick in Posy's collection. "Just go get her," I barked. I planted my hands on my hips and waited. As I stared at the steps, I ran through a series of spells that might work. But fighting unruly houses wasn't something that I'd ever had to do before. I opened my hand and pooled some magic in the center of my palm. A stunning spell. Wondering if I could stun the porch long enough to get up the stairs. Of course, who knew what would happen at the front door? If the steps weren't willing to be walked on, I couldn't imagine the front door would feel any friendlier if I tried to twist the doorknob. "This is ridiculous," I muttered to myself. I threw the stunning spell at the steps and tried to climb them again. But this time, the house pushed me all the way across the yard, and I landed against the perimeter of bushes, like a boxer hitting the ropes that surrounded the ring. "Posy!" A flicker at the front door caught my eye. Posy appeared on the porch. Her eyes narrowed, and her mouth set into a firm line. This wasn't going well. "You bellowed?" she sneered. I pushed myself off the line of bushes and brushed off my backside. "Yes, the house won't let me inside. Adam told me that you're upset." "Of course I am, Holly," she sniffed. "We can't have a ghost hunter coming around. That's a hop, skip, and a shimmy away from having an exorcist brought in, and then I'll be gone. To the other world. Or worse." She shuddered, glimmering back into her transparent form for a split second, before solidifying again. She gave me a pointed stare. "And what happens to you and all the others then, if I'm gone? The SPA agents will come and run this house. Do you want that?" I shook my head. I would rather live in a house run by angry bears than live under the constant eye of the SPA. I held up my hands. "Posy, please. Let's not jump to rash conclusions." I started toward the front porch, taking short, careful steps as though approaching a spooked horse. "First of all, Nick isn't going to come back here. I won't let him." I winced, remembering that I technically told him he could have one tour. I forced a smile. I'd figure that out later. "I can put some wards around the house, if that would make you feel better." She considered my offer before beginning the ghost equivalent of pacing. She floated, skimming the wooden planks, up and down the narrow porch, back and forth. When she stopped, she turned to face me again. "What kind of wards?" Great question. I licked my lips. I needed specifics and a whole lot of confidence if I was going to talk Posy off the ledge. "I know a ward that will make uninvited guests feel nauseated. That usually keeps them from sniffing around for too long." Posy folded her arms.
I hardly think a sick mess all over my prized roses is going to accomplish anything.
Okay, you're right. What about...
Can you make them fall through a trapdoor? We could keep them in the root cellar.
She sounded far too giddy over this suggestion. Of course not, Posy. We're trying to keep SPA out of our hair, remember? She shrugged, unconcerned.
They would only find out if one got loose.
I closed my mouth and gave her a pointed stare.
Okay, fine. Next idea,
she said, sighing. I'll figure something out, okay? You have to trust me. In the meantime, I'd really like to come inside. I pointed at the bottom step. Do you think I could do that? Posy nodded, and she swept back inside. Right before she disappeared, she called back,
You better fix this, Holly Bolt. And no more secrets.
Right, I muttered to myself, gingerly raising my foot to the step. 'Cause it makes so much more sense to volunteer information. It's not like you're prone to freaking out or anything. I squeezed my eyes shut, wondering where the porch would shoot me this time if Posy was wrong. Each blow had been progressively more powerful. If the fourth attempt to climb the steps didn't work, I'd likely find myself thrown halfway out to sea. I set my foot on the step and blew out a relieved breath when the wood remained solid under my shoe. I hurried up the rest and went inside before the house could change its mind. Adam was propped against the banister at the bottom of the stairs when I walked inside. He grinned as I turned around after shutting the door.
You know, if this potion business of yours doesn't work out, you might have a career in ghost therapy.
I darted a glance around, my heart hammering in my chest. Adam laughed.
She's already in the attic.
Relief flooded me once again, and I sighed. Not funny, I said to Adam. Between meeting Philip Tanner and being assaulted by my own house, I wasn't in the mood for his particular brand of humor. He shrugged and pushed away from the stairs.
You okay?
He was still smiling, but it was softer. He reached out a hand and set it on my shoulder. The warmth of his touch enveloped me, and I met his dark eyes.
That last punch was pretty vicious.
I nodded and stepped away from him. I'm fine, thanks. Boots came trotting down the hall and wrapped around my legs, twisting his body to weave around my feet and pushing his head into my legs. I leaned down and scratched his head. You were just coming to save me, huh? Adam snorted.
More likely to see what the holdup is for breakfast. He's been yowling at his bowl since you left.
I laughed and scratched Boots's chin. He's got you pegged, Bootsy. He meowed and then started for the kitchen, where his food was stored away in one of the cupboards. I sighed and followed after him. Adam's steps sounded behind me. I entered the kitchen, letting Boots in first, and then stepped around him as he started yowling and pawing at the cupboard. I pulled out a bag of overpriced cat food, unzipped the seal at the top, and rolled my eyes as the yowls got louder. When he had his food and was happily noshing, I stashed the bag away and turned to face Adam. Where's Lacey? I want to wring her pretty little neck for bringing up Nick in front of Posy. Adam grimaced.
Trust me, I already voiced my displeasure.
I laughed.
I'll bet you did. She was up this morning, but now she's barricaded in her room. Same thing with Gary.
My eyebrows lifted. He was down here when it happened? Adam shook his head.
No, I just know he's up there. I heard him talking to someone. Or maybe it was the TV. I don't know. I think maybe you and Lacey were right. He's starting to give me the creeps.
I nodded slightly. I wanted to ask Adam what he knew about gargoyles, but it wasn't the right place. Well, I have to go find some kind of protective ward to set on the house to appease Posy before we have flooding or some other disaster. Adam nodded and glanced down to where Boots was rooting around in his food dish, spilling kibble over the sides.
I'll clean up after His Royal Highness is done in here.
I smiled down at Boots, and then glanced back up at Adam. Thanks. He flashed me a smile, and I headed out of the kitchen. My stomach was still growling, but I needed some time alone to think. And if I stayed in the kitchen to make myself something, then Adam would expect me to keep up my end of the conversation. So, instead, I slipped into my room and pulled out a box from under my bed. It was packed full of different magical treats. In the Haven, there were shops all over that sold magical confections. Now I was reduced to ordering them on the witch's web. We'd come a long way from ordering things via owl or raven. Now, most things the Havens have to offer are available via a simple ordering webpage that takes Haven currency. Most small items, like food and books, magically appear on the front steps as soon as the order is received. Without it, my banishment would sting a lot more, and would certainly be a lot less delicious. I selected a lemon cloud, a cream-filled cake that was wrapped in delicate tissue paper. The lemon pastry had been crafted to have the health benefits of a good solid meal wrapped in an airy, fresh, zingy little treat. A heck of a lot better than those chalky pills humans take in the morning. I took a bite, and then replaced the box under my bed. Once I got myself situated, propped up against a pile of pillows at the head of the bed, I waved my free hand and summoned my spell book from the bookshelf underneath my TV cabinet. The book was thick, bound with burgundy leather, and clasped together with a gold lock. It floated over to me and dropped onto the bed. I muttered the password around a mouthful of lemon cloud, and the lock sprang free. I cleared my throat. "Property wards," I said, making sure the words were strong and clear. The pages flipped on their own accord and stilled on a section of spells. I scanned my finger down the list, reading the short description, and when I landed on vermin removal, I smiled. Perfect. Nick Rivers might not technically be considered vermin, but I figured it was close enough. I wiggled my fingers over the book and opened to the page indicated from the search. I glanced over the basics of the spell and figured it would do the trick. The spell was created to keep poppers and dwobbles, or I supposed gophers and moles if living on a non-magical plot of land, off the property. But I figured with a few adjustments to the wording, it could help me keep lurking private investigators from clomping around the flower beds, too. With one more gesture, the book closed, latched, and floated back to the bookshelf, tucking itself neatly away. I sighed and took another bite of my lemon cloud. My hand went to the larkspur locket around my neck, and I ran my fingertip over the smooth, warm metal. I absently stared into space, 100 thoughts whizzing around my mind. I still didn't know who Philip Tanner was, or how he'd known Peg. There had to be some connection there, but I had no idea how to go about figuring out what it was. He didn't strike me as a chatty kind of fellow. Quite the opposite. He was still at the top of my list, but without anything other than a hunch to go on, the police weren't likely to pay much attention to me. My involvement in the case was pretty much over. Loud banging sounds above my head snapped me from my musings. I glanced up to the ceiling. Was Posey back on a tear? I squeezed my eyes shut. All I wanted to do was eat the rest of my lunch and get in a quick nap before going out to the garden. I didn't want to deal with an emotionally unstable ghost. Again. Hadn't I done my time already? I started to get up from the bed, and then realized it wasn't Posey. It had to be Gary, stomping around in his room. His room was right above mine. Normally, it was silent. I couldn't remember ever hearing him before. I inched off the bed, my eyes still trained at the ceiling as though he might come crashing through it at any moment. I didn't want to go upstairs and talk to him, but at the same time, having a Gary-sized hole in my ceiling wasn't going to lend itself to a peaceful nap, and my eyelids were begging for a break. The coffee had long since worn off. I also knew I wouldn't be able to get a good night's sleep if I was worried that Gary had a portal right into my room, and I needed a good night's sleep to make sure that all of my senses were sharp the following day. If I could pry information from Philip, I would need to be in peak form. With a heavy sigh, I pushed off of the bed and went to see what all of the ruckus was about. Chapter 17. At the top of the stairs, I nearly ran into Lacey as she was stalking out of her room. She was dressed up in her silver pageant gown, her shiny tiara sparkling on her brow. She narrowed her eyes at me and sidestepped out of my path. "Watch out," she growled. She continued on to the door across from hers and knocked loudly on Gary's closed door. "Hey, Gary, keep it down. I'm trying to practice my question and answer session and I can't hear myself think with all of the stomping." Nothing. Just more stomping. Lacey heaved a sigh and rolled her eyes. She knocked again, this time with extra oomph. "I mean it, Gary. I'll let Holly hex you." "Me?" Lacey turned her cold eyes onto me. "That's why you're up here, isn't it? To shut him up?" Okay, she had me there. "Yes, but I'm not hexing anyone." Lacey growled. "I remember when witches had balls." "Bite me, Lacey. I'm not interested in arguing with you. But if I was, it wouldn't be about my apparent lack of balls. It would be about your running your mouth to Posey and causing her to flip out, ghost style." Lacey rolled her eyes. "That was so not my fault. Let me guess, Adam told you that?" I crossed my arms, not answering her question. "Whatever. Either you hex this whatever in the other world he is, or I'll break down this door and really give Posey something to freak out about." She swirled the train of her gown around and stomped back to her room, slamming the door behind her for emphasis. I glanced at Gary's door, and a shiver ran down my spine. After what Posey confessed about the last gargoyle that resided at the manor, I wasn't sure I wanted to cross him. Contrary to what Lacey thought, hexing wouldn't actually do much. At least not without putting in some research first. Hexing on the fly was always a bad idea. Seriously, terrible, terrible idea. I huffed and went over to Gary's door. The stomping continued, and as I neared, I heard his low, gravelly voice. He must be on the phone with someone. I raised my hand to knock, but then dropped it just as quickly. Lacey was right. I didn't have any balls. I went back down the stairs and scurried to my room. I shut the door and locked it with an extra security ward before going back to the safety of my bed. Boots was back from his mid-morning meal and sleeping soundly on my pillow. I stroked his fur, and then spotted a dab of yellow frosting on his whiskers. I darted a glance to the place I left my lemon cloud. Nothing but crumbs. "Bootsy!" He opened one eye. "If anyone's getting hexed, it's going to be you, you little thief," I growled, pushing him off of my pillow. He didn't look too concerned. He waddled over to his cat bed, situated himself, and plopped down without so much as another glance back at me. "Ugh!" I jumped off the bed, went back into my stash of snacks, and opened a new lemon cloud. This time I didn't mess around. I shoved half of the pastry into my mouth before even sitting back down. Another series of stomps shook the light fixture above my bed. With a long sigh, I dropped my gaze back to my spell book, and an idea popped into my head. I shoved the rest of the lemon cloud into my mouth, and then took the larkspur off my neck, while I swallowed the rest of my treat. Great-grandmother Honeysuckle will know what to do. I stroked the warm metal and whispered the password. The larkspur opened slowly. Honeysuckle always had a flair for the dramatic. And when the strange fog cleared, a silhouette appeared. After the image shifted and clarified, Great-grandmother Honeysuckle's warm, wrinkled face was staring back at me. She looked just like my mother had, the same high cheekbones, round green eyes, and full lips. Her long hair had once been chestnut, but had long since turned white. She kept it in an intricate braid wrapped around her head. The women in our family line all bore a strong resemblance to one another. I was the first witch in over 500 years to have auburn hair. I still had the exact same cheekbones and green eyes, though. In witch family trees, it was the woman's name that was passed down to the following generation. My father's last name had been Sampson. "Who's there? Who are you?" Honeysuckle demanded, her tone sharp, like the yaps of the little dog she'd kept as her familiar. I wasn't quite sure how the magic worked, but somehow Honeysuckle had managed to fuse a piece of her life force into the larkspur, and when she passed over to the other world, a fragment of her remained inside the locket. As the necklace was passed down to each new generation, the magic grew and strengthened, but Honeysuckle was the only occupant. Unfortunately, the magic was untested, and while she managed to retain her wisdom and memories, her short-term memory was somewhat splintered. I tried to keep myself from sighing. It was hard to know how many times we'd had this conversation, but it was enough that the first 5 lines were committed to my memory. Honeysuckle, it's Holly Bolt, your great-granddaughter, 7 lines down.
Holly Bolt?
She repeated wistfully. She leaned in, her eyes narrowed to see me more clearly. She backed away, and I heard a small yap. Oh, great. Weeble's there, too. Honeysuckle and her little white cream puff of a dog had been inseparable in life, and the dog had followed her into her residence inside the locket. I didn't have anything against the little mop of a dog, but he made it hard to carry on a conversation. The stomping upstairs got louder. I nodded at Honeysuckle, willing her to get to the part where she recognized me. Maribel's daughter, I added.
Oh, dear, yes, of course, Haley.
Holly.
Weeble, get down!
She batted at the white ball of fluff as he jumped into the frame, likely sitting on her lap. If she had a lap. As I said, the details of the magic were sketchy to me. Great-grandmother Honeysuckle, I need your help. She turned her eyes back to me.
Of course, Haley. How can I help?
I sighed. It's Holly. Oh, never mind. I need to know what kind of magic can be cast against gargoyles.
Gargoyles?
She spat it out like a strong curse word. I nodded and glanced up as my light fixture went swinging again. I think I met one recently, and I need to know what I'm up against.
Is he hulking, surly, and reeks like boiled cabbage?
Yes, on the first 2. I don't know about the smell. My lips curled back just thinking about getting that close to him. Honeysuckle stroked Weeble's head as the dog sat still, staring at me.
Sounds like a real problem, dear.
Yes. I debated whether or not to bring up the murder investigation. It would likely only rile Honeysuckle up. She tended to get off track when questions weren't direct and to the point. She was more like a talking dictionary. I winced at the unflattering comparison. After all, she was still my family.
You look good, dear.
Honeysuckle's eyes went bright.
Tell me, have you met a nice young wizard yet?
I rolled my eyes.
You stop that right now, Holly Bolt.
Now she remembers my name. I cringed. Sorry, great-grandmother Honeysuckle. But no, I'm not looking for a wizard right now.
Then what are you doing?
I sighed, not supposing she would care much for the truth. Working at a coffee shop in a human community, dodging flirtatious shifters, and getting tangled up in a murder investigation weren't the kind of dreams she likely held for me. As the guardian of the Larkspur, I was supposed to be off taking the witching world by storm. I should be conquering new realms, inventing ways to bring further peace between supernaturals, and finding the answers to all of the mysterious unknowns of life. Instead, I was banished from the Havens, on a short list of troublemakers with the SPA, and worrying that the gargoyle in the room above mine might come crashing down and rip me into tiny, bite-sized pieces. Seeing as how I was currently the only person able to communicate with Honeysuckle, at least as far as I knew, I decided to fudge the truth a little. I'm working with SPA on a new top-secret project. That's why I really need to know about gargoyles. Okay, so I fudged the truth a lot. She'd probably forget it within the hour anyway.
Ooh, that sounds most exciting.
Honeysuckle clapped her hands, and Weeble barked his approval.
I do hope that you're not interacting directly with those beasts, though, Holly. They're nasty, vile creatures.
I had a feeling.
They are bloodthirsty savages, not fit for the supernatural or human world. If you ask me, they should have all been sent to the other world long ago.
Honeysuckle shuddered. What is it that they do?
Make trouble.
she replied, giving me a definitive nod. Helpful. I tried not to sigh. Do they kill witches and wizards? That was the most pressing question. If they think it will serve them, sure. She shrugged, as though I'd asked if they liked pizza with thin crust. I shuddered and dared another peek up at the ceiling. The light fixture had stopped shaking, and I realized the stomping had as well. I'd gotten so wrapped up in my conversation with Honeysuckle that I hadn't noticed when it stopped. What about humans? Honeysuckle gave me a dark look. They have a long and violent history with all species, Holly. They prey on humans because they see them as weak and defenseless. They make a sport of hunting them. Hunting them? I grimaced and bundled the covers on my bed up around me, as though a cocoon of blankets could keep me from feeling the fear that crept over me at Honeysuckle's dark proclamation. She nodded. Yes. As I said, Holly, stay away from them. I can only hope the SPA is asking your assistance in ridding the world of them altogether. The image started to fade, and my heart squeezed. There was only so much time to talk. The magic couldn't sustain long conversations. Honeysuckle's expression shifted into a smile. It looks like it's time for me to go, dear. I do hope you take my advice. I will, great-grandmother. I'll stay clear of any gargoyles. There was no sense in worrying her. Her smile widened. I meant about finding a nice young wizard. She winked, and then the image flickered out entirely, leaving behind nothing but murky shadows and the echo of her parting words. I snorted as I closed the locket and slipped it back over my head. Right, that's just what I need. More complications in my life. Chapter 18. Siren's song was set to reopen in a little over an hour. So far, the 5 of us had worked to get things cleaned and set up, while Philip holed away in the back office and made phone calls. The floors were mopped and polished to a waxy sheen. All of the tables were set up and loaded with bountiful floral arrangements that had been dropped off by Mr. and Mrs. Carson, who ran the florist shop in town. I found it odd that Philip, a shrewd businessman, had spent so much money on flowers. But I supposed it was his way of bringing some beauty in to lighten the mood that could possibly dip low with the freshness of the murder still on everyone's mind. I was in the back room with Cassie, working on checking in a large delivery of pastries and baked goods from a bakery and cake shop in the next town over from Beechwood Harbor. The smell of the array of treats was mouth-watering, and I was secretly hoping to find something that had come in damaged just so that Cassie and I could split it. A bell sounded from the front, and Cassie poked her head out to see who had come in. Oh, no. I set my clipboard on the workbench and went to join her at the curved archway. I poked my head out and sighed. Incoming. Greta was striding through the shop, a tight smile across her face as she took in the flowers and the new light fixture that Philip had installed with Frankie and Paisley's help earlier that morning. She locked eyes with Cassie and me before we could scramble out of her way. Ladies, you can point me in the right direction. I heard you're under new management. That was an odd way of putting it. Cassie nodded. That's right. Set to reopen in just over an hour for the afternoon rush. Mm-hmm. Well, the flowers are a nice touch. She brushed off the front of her brown apron, and specks of potting soil fell to the freshly polished floor. She didn't seem to notice. Before you open, I would like to speak to the new owner. I need to go over the rules and regulations for being a part of the Old Town Harbor shops. Cassie smiled sweetly. Of course, Greta. Let me just tell Philip you're here. I snorted. A cage match between Greta and Philip would be a popcorn-worthy affair. Greta shot me a dirty look, and then gave Cassie a brief nod. I'll be waiting out front. It's more of a walking tour. I bit back a laugh. Greta strutted off through the shop, and a second later, the bell rang on the front door. Cassie and I giggled together for a moment before she slapped on a straight face and went to knock on the door to the office. I returned my attention to counting muffins. Frankie and Paisley came in through the side door. I still think it's weird, Paisley whispered. I know, but there's nothing we can do about it. What are you guys talking about? I asked, looking up from my count. Frankie looked from Paisley and then back to me. It just feels odd. You know, the flowers, the happy little signs all over town. He held up one of the bright flyers they'd been in charge of distributing. It's like this is supposed to be a celebration. Paisley nodded. I get that the show must go on, but we're one confetti toss away from this being a party. I mean, the police tape just came down, Frankie added, his expression dark. It did? I'd been stuck inside all day. Yeah. Chief Lincoln was out earlier. Philip went out, and they exchanged words. Next thing I know, Chief took it down. He didn't seem very happy about it. I nodded, but my thoughts were ambling away. Philip had gotten snippy with Chief Lincoln? And won? What was going on around here? Philip's office door opened, and Cassie came out with Philip on her heels. From the look on his face, he was ready to do battle again. Cassie must have warned him what was coming. Cassie led him outside and returned a minute later, unable to stop smiling. This is gonna be good. We all crowded around the front, fluffing floral arrangements, sweeping already immaculate floors, or wiping clean counters. Whatever we could do to get the best seats for the show unfolding on the front walk. Greta waved her arms frantically, gesticulating at a furious pace as she took Philip on a tour of the sidewalk in between the two shops. What do you think she's telling him now? I asked. Cassie gave me a sideways grin. Probably explaining the proper placement of the public trash cans. Paisley snorted a laugh. It's like Mr. Clean and the teapot from Beauty and the Beast. I cracked up. That's giving Greta a lot of credit. Wasn't the teapot nice? Friendly? Cassie laughed along with me. You're right. That doesn't quite fit. Frankie pointed out the window. Oh, looks like she might have moved on to appropriate sayings for welcome mats. We watched as Greta's arm swung down to draw Philip's attention to the ground. Paisley wiped away the tears from the corners of her eyes, her face beet red from laughing so hard. As if anything other than welcome is ever appropriate. And don't get me started on the ones with cartoon dogs and cats on them, Cassie said, mock horror infused in her tone. I'm shocked he isn't taking notes, I added, giggling uncontrollably with Cassie. Someone should go take him a notepad. We all doubled over, but it was cut short when Philip barked something inaudible at the determined woman and made his way back to the front doors of the coffee shop. We all sprang back into action. The bell sounded as Philip came back inside, looking a little dazed. Leathery old bird, he mumbled under his breath, stalking back through the shop to his office. Apparently that went well, I deadpanned. We all snickered, and then went back to work. Hours after the reopening, Siren's song was still full to the point where even the back patio was standing room only. Not that anyone seemed to mind. As a small town, Siren's song was the only coffee shop, and its closure, even though it only lasted a few days, had affected a lot of people who considered their daily coffee stop an important part of their life's rhythm. Still, I was surprised to see how big the turnout was. Didn't anyone have jobs? I was also surprised that Philip was missing from his big moment. After all of the time he spent overseeing every detail of the prep for the reopening, he was strangely absent from the event itself. Before I could go looking for any sign of him, a person I hadn't expected to see at the event waltzed through the doors and strode right up to the counter where I was manning the espresso machine. I reached up and absently smoothed my hands over my hair. Adam? What are you doing here? He smiled at me. Thought I'd come see how the reopening was going? He paused to scan the busy room. From the looks of it, very well. I adjusted my headband the second before his eyes returned to mine. Yeah, it's a bit of a madhouse. You want me to make you something? Decaf, of course. Adam laughed. Caffeine had strange effects on shifters. According to Adam, some shifters like the way it makes them feel, but he was not in that camp. His eyes dropped to what was left of the pastries in the front case, and smiled. I should have known. I'm all about the snacks, he said. Let me get one of those frosted things. A cinnamon roll? I prompted.
Sure. Actually, 2. I mostly just want the frosting part.
I laughed and grabbed for a waxy pastry bag and a set of bamboo tongs to pick up the rolls. I swear you'd eat a car tire if it was coated in frosting. Hardy har. I handed him the bag. He reached for his wallet, but I waved him off. Don't worry about it. I'll pick it up. You got dinner and dessert the other night, I said, shifting my weight back into my heels. Adam grinned at me.
That's because that was a date, gorgeous.
My cheeks warmed. I wasn't sure how I felt about dating Adam. It went against all my rules, but somehow it was happening anyways. I was about to argue that it wasn't really a date, but dropped it. Which was a good decision, as 2 seconds later, Nick came through the front door. Adam watched my face fall.
Holly, come on. You know I'm just...
No, it's not that, I hissed. He whipped around and saw Nick headed straight toward us.
Who was that?
He asked out of the corner of his mouth. Nick took his place in line behind Adam, and I ground my teeth. Hello, Nick, I said, leaning around Adam to flash him a polite smile. This is Adam. He lives at the manor, too. Nick approached the counter and stood to the left of Adam. He lifted a brow at me.
Adam? Wasn't that the name of that stray dog?
Adam's jaw flexed as he turned to face Nick. Nick offered his hand, but Adam ignored it.
So you're the one rummaging through the bushes in the middle of the night?
Nick paled. Adam had a good couple of inches and probably 20 pounds of muscle on him. Clearly not an equal opponent, especially when Adam was radiating sheer hostility.
My apologies. Adam, was it? As I explained to your lovely roommate here, I was in the wrong, and have no intention of snooping around in the future. All good?
He offered his hand again. A gentleman's apology. Adam gave him another hard glare, but then took his hand.
I hope you're being straight with her, for your own good.
Nick gave a brisk nod. They dropped their handshake, and he took a step back. He glanced at me out of the corner of his eye. A pang of guilt hit my stomach, but I wasn't ready to call off Adam just yet. Nick needed to know that he was on a dangerous path if he kept poking around the manor.
You really a ghost hunter?
Adam folded his arms and sized Nick up.
Aren't you a little old to be chasing a bunch of fairy tale stories?
Nick sighed.
You know, I obviously made a mistake in coming here, Holly. I had some information to share with you, but I'll come back some other time.
He retrieved an envelope from the inside of his jacket, holding it up for a moment before he took a step toward the door. My eyes locked onto the envelope as my nerves flared with panic. Information? That was what I needed, even more than peace and quiet at home. I lunged forward. Nick, wait. He paused and glanced from Adam to me. What kind of information? I asked, shooting Adam a pleading, sideways glance. Adam set his jaw.
I was just leaving anyway, Holly. I'll see you at home.
I sighed. Mental note to self. Remind Adam that I'm not a tree he can mark up with his scent. Adam grunted at Nick, and then made his way through the crowd and back outside. I returned my gaze to Nick, who still appeared ruffled over the entire confrontation. Not that I could blame him. Adam could be quite intimidating when he wanted to be. I'm sorry about him, I said sheepishly. Nick eyed me for a long moment, like he was trying to work out a puzzle.
It's fine.
I smiled softly. Listen, Nick. I should also say that I'm sorry for the way I stormed out the other night. He held up a hand.
Nah, don't worry about it. We obviously got off on the wrong foot. But that's all behind us now. I'm bowing out of our deal. I'll steer clear of the manor.
He gave a small smile.
The way I see it, we both live in a very small town. There's no sense in letting an awkward first impression create bad blood. Friends?
I nodded. Friends. My fingers were itching to get my hands on whatever was in the envelope in his hands. Nick glanced around the room behind him. No one was paying much attention to us. A few of the gossip queens glanced over, but then quickly returned to their conversation, some of which was undoubtedly about me, and Adam, and Nick. I winced at the way that could all be spun.
Don't open it now.
He slid the envelope over the counter, and I gathered it into my apron pocket to look at later. I nodded, but couldn't resist running my finger along the seam. What's the gist? Nick swiveled a look around me.
Philip Tanner, the guy on the lawsuit paperwork.
My heart slammed against my ribcage. You mean my new boss? Nick's eyes went wide. What? He spat. I leaned in close. He owns this place. He blinked a few times, slowly, as though he couldn't fully process what I'd said.
Any chance you can take a break?
I caught a glance to Cassie, who was on her scheduled break. She was occupying a corner table, flipping through her phone, her face grim. I returned my eyes to Nick. Not yet. I have to wait for Cassie. But I was going to take out the trash. I jerked my head toward the direction of the alley.
Got it. Can I get a large mocha before you do that?
He asked, flashing a grin. Nick, I groaned.
You're fast. I've witnessed it firsthand. Remember the first time I came in? Then again, that probably had more to do with the fact that you wanted me out of here as soon as humanly possible.
I plead the fifth, I replied with a soft laugh. But you've made your point. Large mocha coming right up. When Nick had his mocha in hand, he left the shop. I waited a beat, and then disappeared into the back and started gathering the trash before anyone else came up to the counter for a refill. Paisley, I'm taking this out, I called to the blonde who was standing in the middle of the back room. She was hunched over, working to pull the plastic stopper out of a large jug of mocha mix. Why do they make these things impossible to open without breaking a nail? She asked as I passed by. I wiggled my fingers, and the stopper came loose.
See, you got it. No sweat.
I'll be right back. She marveled at the plastic stopper in her hand, as though she couldn't believe it had come out so easily. Ah, the power of magic. An ever-effective tool, whether battling renegade trolls or giant bottles of chocolate. I stepped out the side door and found Nick waiting at the end of the alley, apparently not willing to get too close to where Peg's body had been found. The asphalt didn't show any sign of the crime. Everything had been collected and the remnants cleaned away with chemicals and a pressure washer. I briefly wondered what it would be like to be on a crime scene cleanup detail. I shuddered at the passing thought and scurried a little quicker to meet Nick, chucking the trash over the side of the open dumpster on my way. Philip Tanner called us all together yesterday. He told us that he's the new owner of the shop. He apparently runs a chain of coffee shops in Idaho. Anyway, he wasted no time whipping this place back into shape for today's opening, I explained without taking a breath. Who is he? Nick nodded.
He was Peg's brother-in-law.
What? I didn't realize Peg even had a sister. She never talked about her. At least not that I can remember.
A familiar pang of guilt bit into me over how little I knew about my former employer.
Nick shifted his weight between his feet like he was antsy standing in the alley.
Well, that's because her sister, Denna, passed away about 5 years ago. She had cancer.
Oh, I covered my mouth. How terrible. Nick bobbed his head.
She and Denna opened the shop together a little over 10 years ago. When Denna passed away, Peg was supposed to be passing along her sister's share of the profits to Philip, her brother-in-law.
Which I'm guessing she didn't do. Hence the lawsuit.
Right. Apparently she was never very fond of Philip and even accused him of mistreating Denna.
My eyebrows hiked up. Any proof?
Peg made complaints to the police. That's what's in the envelope, those records. But there are no pictures, and the sister never came forward to back those claims up. But in my experience...
Bat wings! It all clicked into place like a series of dominoes, each piece of information falling until the whole picture was revealed. Philip had a history of violence, saw Peg as a problem as she stood between him and his half of Siren Song's profits. Nick. It was him. He held up a hand. We don't know that, Holly, but it certainly doesn't look right. Do you know when he got into town? Nick shook his head. No, I was hoping you knew. He didn't say, but I know how to find out. Chapter 19.
So, did your friend help you with the case?
I groaned and stopped halfway up the front walk. Adam appeared from the dusky shadows and came into the light shining down across the yard from the porch. He stood with his legs apart and crossed his arms. Adam, why were you such a jerk to Nick? He barked a hollow laugh.
I wasn't, Holly. Believe me.
Ugh, you know what? I've had the longest day in recent memory. I haven't eaten anything today. My feet are numb from being stuffed into these adorable but evil shoes all day. I don't have time for this interrogation. Why don't you go bug Lacey? I started up toward the porch, my fashion-forward torture devices clicking with purpose over the hand-laid pavers. Adam stepped into my way.
What happened to protecting the manor?
My eyes flashed at the same time magic filled each of my palms. What are you talking about? Adam narrowed his eyes at me.
Why are you talking to him? Working with him? He's just trying to use you to get access to the house. To us.
You're being ridiculous, I spat, holding up a hand, palm up, so he could watch the glowing energy roll around. I flicked my gaze from the magic up to his. A satisfied smile spread across my lips at the hint of fear in his eyes. I'm done talking about this. So if I were you, I would drop the tough guy act and let me go inside.
Or what? You'll blast me with your magic?
He folded his arms, flexing his strong biceps under the snug sleeves of his t-shirt. Yep, that was the plan. He snorted.
You're not going to blast me.
The ball of energy grew brighter, but at the last second I clasped my palm closed, tamping the magic back down again. Fine, I'm not. But I'm still not in the mood for your attitude, so let me go. Please, Adam? His expression shifted, softening. He set a hand on my shoulder, and I was too tired to back away. Besides, with the anger still flooding in my veins, I wasn't exactly in danger of succumbing to his charm. He leaned in close.
Holly, I'm just trying to protect you. Guys like Nick.
I huffed and batted his hand away from my shoulder. What does that even mean, Adam? You don't know him. You met him for less than a minute.
What the hell, Holly? You're defending him now?
I'm not defending him. I still think he was a creep for rooting around in the bushes that night, but at the same time, he's helping me prove that Cassie didn't kill Peg. He didn't have to come to the shop today, but he did, simply to give me information that might help clear all of this up. How can I hate him when he went out of his way to help me? Adam shook his head. His eyes narrowed at me.
Well, I'm not as charitable. If he comes near this place, I'm not going to give him the second chance that you're suddenly so willing to offer.
That's not going to happen. I set new wards last night. I patted him on the chest. So don't worry your pretty little puppy dog head. I went around him and stomped the rest of the way into the house. My tart response only made me feel worse. At best, Adam was genuinely looking out for me and the rest of our roommates. At worst, he was jealous, because he truly cared about me and saw Nick as a threat for my attention. Which, in some twisted way, was actually sweet. Either way, I'd have to fix it later. Right now, I had other problems to worry about. After Nick left Siren's song, I went back into work and finished out the long, exhausting day, not leaving until after 6, that's p.m., when the sun was on its way out of the sky. The day was long and tiring, but had given me a lot of time to stew over everything that Nick had revealed about who Philip really was. My suspicion that he was the one responsible for Peg's murder was greater than ever. I just had to find a way to prove it. Philip had been at the coffee shop all day, though he spent most of it in Peg's old office, making phone calls and sending emails from his shiny laptop. When we closed down, he came out to talk to all of us about the event and the plan going forward. It was obvious that he was a savvy businessman, and no one had any complaints or concerns. He spoke in clipped, short sentences that were to the point. He stuck to shop business only, which made it nearly impossible to get additional information out of him, or to sway him to a new topic. I had no idea how I was going to get him to divulge anything to me. At least, under normal circumstances. Luckily for me, I wasn't all that normal. As soon as I entered the manor, Boots rushed out to greet me, or scold me because his dinner was late, and I glanced down as he rammed his head against my shin. I kicked out of the tight shoes and went into the kitchen. I fed Boots, and then retired to my room to work on finalizing the details of my plan to solve Peg's murder, with the tubby but satisfied furball tucked under my arm. A few hours later, I'd managed to put together a pretty complete plan, but it would require a little touch of magic. I kept most of my potion-making supplies locked away in a magically sealed cabinet under my bed. I preferred to use any botanical ingredients as freshly collected as possible, which was relatively easy to do considering that I grew most things basic potions required. Everything else was stored in a cabinet under my bed. I waved my hand over the location where the cabinet was stowed away, and the cherry wood box, inlaid with hand-carved wards, hovered an inch off the ground and floated up toward me. It landed with a soft thump as it settled back on the floor. I murmured a series of spells to release the security wards, and then flicked my wrist to lift the lid. The box was lined with crushed velvet in a deep royal purple color. The box had been a gift from my Aunt Bethany when she passed down the larkspur locket. It was a couple of feet long and a foot wide, but its relatively small size was deceiving. Everything was packed neatly away with a resizing charm that allowed me to carefully store away a good-sized cauldron, hundreds of glass vials in all different colors, shapes, and sizes, and about a bookshelf's worth of reference books, parchments, and scrolls. My favorite potion-making handbook was wedged in beside an array of pearlescent frosted glass vials that contained fairy dust, all collected humanely from willing donors. Logically, I should hide it away in one of the compartments because fairy dust isn't cheap, but I couldn't help but want the glowing vials displayed front and center. I removed the potion handbook and ran my fingers down the weathered spine. It felt like home. I breathed deeply of the ink and thick pages as I reverently peeled back the front cover. I knew what I was looking for and right where to find it, but I took my time, running my fingers along the table of contents. It was always an experience. So many of my best memories revolved around time spent poring over the pages contained inside the old book. Aunt Bethany had taught me almost everything I knew about potion making. I pushed past the first third of the pages and kept going until I found what I was looking for. Truth be told. Excellent, I said, smiling to myself. I read the list of ingredients, mentally checking them off one by one. If there was something that I didn't have on hand, my whole plan would be thrown into jeopardy. Ordering most potion materials wasn't as easy as hopping on the witch's web and placing an order to be instantaneously delivered. Most high-end potion ingredients had to be purchased in person at a haven. The closest haven was located in Seattle, but I was currently on the banishment list and would not be welcomed in any of the shops. It's a long story. I reached the end of the ingredients list and released a sigh. Thank the stars. According to the recipe, I had everything I needed to brew the potion. The only thing I was a little short on was time. The recommended brewing time was 72 hours, but I didn't have 3 days to wait. Neither did Cassie. If no other suspects were found, Chief Lincoln would have no choice but to arrest her on the evidence they had and try to interrogate her to get a confession. It would be a nightmare for her. And she could potentially lose her new management position in the process. Boots, we gotta work fast. I scratched his head as he brushed past me. As my familiar, he was always able to pick up on my emotions. Come on. Heartsong has to be harvested at midnight, which is in... I consulted my watch. 20 minutes. Boots trotted to the bedroom door and waited while I placed the security wards back on the cabinet and flicked my wrist to levitate the hefty box back under the bed and out of sight. Everyone in the manor knew I was a potions witch. They knew what kinds of plants I was growing out in the greenhouse. There was no mystery or pretense to keep up, but I didn't feel safe leaving my potion supplies out and about. Some of my ingredients could be used for other types of magic. Dark types of magic. I trusted Adam, and Posey couldn't physically touch anything, but Lacey had questionable motives. If she thought a handful of fairy dust could buy her a new tiara, she'd probably jump at the chance to swipe some. Then there was Gary, and he was definitely not to be trusted. I opened my bedroom door and pushed out into the hall. Boots meowed until I conjured a ball of light and held it up for him to find his way. "You're a cat, Boots. Try acting like one for once," I murmured in the direction of his round rear end. As my familiar, Boots was supposed to be my companion as well as my guardian. I wasn't sure I felt entirely safe, considering that the creature watching my back was built more like a beach ball than a cheetah, and on top of that, was periodically afraid of the dark. The manor was eerily silent. Usually it was the most quiet in the morning time before anyone else was awake. Lacey must be out for the night with her undead beauty queen brigade. Adam was probably out running in the woods, or scrounging around McNally's dumpsters for a midnight snack. Posey liked to play old records in the study when she was restless. As for Gary, apparently he liked to wander the neighborhood dressed like a hoodlum, if Mrs. Grady and Mrs. Brooks were to be believed. I stopped at the front door and retrieved one of my thick crocheted sweaters from the coat rack. Once bundled up, I pulled open the front door and let Boots out, sending the light orb into the air to follow after him so he wouldn't get too freaked out. I shut the door and padded down the front walk, and then cut through the grass to the side yard. It was a dark night, with only a sliver of moonlight hanging in the sky. Boots was up ahead, the orb of light floating above him. I watched his orange bottle-brush tail swishing curiously as the gentle night breeze washed over him. When he reached the end of the flower beds, he stopped, and his back arched. The fur along his back rose up, and he let out a low growl. "What the?" I tiptoed closer to him, and realized we weren't alone. A hulking form was pacing back and forth at the edge of the tree line.
"You have to get me out of here, Daryl. I don't care what the council says." I went ramrod straight. The cold, clipped voice belonged to Gary. Chapter 20. He spun around, and I realized that the reason I hadn't easily identified him was because his wings were fully displayed, swishing behind him in the wind he was creating with his long, powerful strides as he paced. Boots let out another low growl, and I sank to the ground beside him. "Shh!" I set my hand on his tensed back and sent out a calming spell into his fur. He relaxed, but his tail refused to go back down. "I'm not meant to live in places like this, with all these people and their little dogs. You know that my control isn't that strong. What did you expect?" My eyebrows went high as I listened to him rant and rave. Whatever had him worked up was serious. One thing was clear, though. He was definitely a gargoyle. His thick, leathery wings looked like they'd been spliced onto his back from a small dragon. It was intimidating enough in the dark from 100 feet away. I could only imagine the terror if he was to be in his true form in broad daylight, sweeping through the sky, his fangs and wings on full display. I shivered at the thought, and the hairs on my neck raised up just like Boots's fur had. I pulled the collar of my sweater up a little higher and darted a gaze over to my greenhouse. It was 10 paces away. The heartsong was a very finicky plant that would immediately shrivel if harvested at any time other than midnight, so I was rapidly running out of time. If I couldn't get it tonight, I would have to wait another day, on top of the elongated brewing time for the potion itself. "Come on, Bootsy," I whispered. "No, she's dead. I already told you that,"
Gary boomed. I stopped in my tracks, my feet freezing to the ground. dead.
That's why I need out. She's dead, and people saw me. There are witnesses.
He paused, pacing back again.
I don't know. Some lady and her dog.
His back was turned. I took a chance, ducked down, and ran for the greenhouse. Unfortunately, I misjudged his heightened senses. As my hand hit the doorknob for the greenhouse, the sound of flapping wings reached me a moment too late. By the time I whipped around to see if Gary had heard me, he was barreling through the sky, right at me. I couldn't move under the fierce look in his eyes. They glowed electric blue, cutting through the darkness. When they were trained on me, I couldn't move. I was frozen in stone, just like a gargoyle perched on the side of a building. Gary snarled.
I'm going to have to call you back,
he hissed into the phone clasped in his hand. He dropped it into his pocket right before he reached me. He landed on his feet with a solid thud.
What are you doing out here?
I sucked in a breath, grateful that my lungs were unaffected by his magic hold. I needed something from the greenhouse, I stammered, darting my eyes to the side, unable to raise my hand and gesture to the door behind me.
At midnight?
He hissed, baring his fangs. Heartsong has to be harvested at midnight. There was no point in lying to him. If I told him the truth, maybe he would let me go. Gary glared over my shoulder.
Heartsong? I've never heard of it.
It's rare.
What do you need it for? Why is it so urgent that you had to come out here and eavesdrop on my phone call?
I swallowed hard. I'm making a truth potion. Gary's forehead bunched up, revealing deeply etched lines. So far, he hadn't physically touched me, but his hold on me was impossible to break. The magic was strong, and I couldn't find anything in my mental stores of spell work to pull from in order to get loose. My hands were frozen just like the rest of me. I didn't need a wand to cast basic spells, but I did need the use of my hands.
A truth potion, huh? I thought those were restricted for council members and SPA agents only.
Really? He was going to give me a morality lesson? I smiled sweetly. Well, considering you're casting a stone spell on me right now, I wouldn't really think you'd be the one to talk about restrictions and appropriate magic. Gary reeled back.
Well, well, well. You're a nasty little witch, aren't you? Let me ask, at what point did back-talking a powerful gargoyle sound like a good idea to you?
I sneered at him. About 2 seconds ago. Listen, Gary, I don't care who you are or what kind of magic you have. I just want to collect my heartsong and get back inside. This doesn't have to be a big thing. Gary let out a cold, cruel laugh.
Oh, but you see, I don't know how much you heard of my phone conversation.
I didn't hear any of it. I just got out here. Gary's unnaturally blue eyes scoured mine.
You're lying.
I didn't realize mind reading was a gargoyle trait.
It isn't,
he replied, the words fast, like the crack of a whip. Then let me go. I don't care what you were talking about, or to whom.
Not until you tell me what you heard.
He leaned forward, his face only inches from mine. I kept my eyes locked on the ice-blue orbs shining at me, and poured all of my concentration into one hand. A stunning spell. It charged up, and I visualized flinging my hand out, fingers wide, the way the spell would roll off my hand like a flame. Nothing happened. I sighed. Fine. You said something about a lady and a dog. Gary snarled. His fangs revealed a second time. They had to be at least 3 inches long, protruding from the top row in place of his canines. It was like looking at a vampire on steroids. They were deadly and menacing. Fangs like that could only mean he killed and ate other beings. I could only hope that loud-mouthed witch wasn't on the menu. I tried my spell once more. This time, right before I imagined my hand casting the spell, a yowl shot through the silence of the night. Boots' calming spell wore off, and he lunged out of the bushes and flew at Gary. I screamed at the violent sounds that clashed together as Boots threw his weight against Gary's chest, his claws slashing and swiping in a fury. With Gary's eyes off of me and on Boots, I was freed from the spell. I cast my stunning spell at him, hitting him right in the heart, over the top of Boots' head. Boots clawed at Gary's face like an animal possessed, and Gary let loose a horrifying growl of his own. "Boots, come on!" I bolted for the front yard, forgetting about the heart song plant. The truth be told potion was the last thing on my mind.
"Get back here, witch! You'll pay for your little beast."
Gary's wings beat at the air, but I didn't stop running to look back and see where he was. I conjured another stunning spell, flung it over my shoulder, and ducked my chin to keep running as fast as my legs could carry me. I winced as the rush of his wings against the cool night air told me that I'd misfired. I made it as far as the front yard, almost to the side of the porch, when Gary swept down from the sky and bowled me over. I hit the ground hard on my side. My elbow struck first, and a jolt of pain ricocheted up my arm. Before I could fire another spell, he pinned me down and fixed his gaze on me. I froze in place, my shoulder blades pressed into the grass. My body refused to listen to any of my demands to get up and run. "Gary, leave me alone," he laughed.
"Oh, it's too late for that, Holly Bolt. You know too much now, and I can't leave you running wild with that information."
My eyes flew open, wide and crazy. "So what? You're just going to kill me? Right here in the front yard?" He let his fangs do the talking. Chapter 21. Gary's fangs lowered, and I squeezed my eyes closed. His cold blue eyes glowering down at me in the darkness would be the last thing I'd ever see. I tried to struggle against him, to squirm away from his hot breath on my face, but it was hopeless. I was pinned, and my body felt as heavy as a boulder. "Gary," I begged, hating the pathetic tone to my own voice. "Please, don't."
"Just accept it, witch. It's easier if you don't fight it."
His snarling words were cut short with an impact and a grunt. My limbs freed again, and I popped up to find Gary struggling underneath a gigantic black dog. "Adam!" Relief and terror washed through me simultaneously. Boots raced around the corner of the house and rejoined the fight. Gary lashed out, and Adam in his beast form was blown back. Gary glared at the dog as he shook off the impact. But apparently, his magic didn't work against animals. Or, in this case, shifters in their animal form. Adam didn't freeze under Gary's icy gaze. He rallied and lunged for Gary, knocking into his chest, growling and baring his own impressive set of teeth. Gary was undeterred, and made another swipe for Adam. Adam flew backwards and landed hard on the ground with a low yelp. Panic rose up inside of me. I'd always been better at potions than combat spells. Light orbs, stunning spells, and shields were my sweet spots. Anything more complicated required a wand and a lot of concentration. I ground my teeth together and threw a shield up right before Gary's claws, which appeared to be as long as his fangs, cut through the air at Adam. They bounced off the spell, and I quickly hit him with a stunning spell as he reared back, looking at his own hand to see what had happened. Boots flew at his back, slashing and clawing like mad. Gary howled, and violently contorted his body, trying to fling the 20-pound tabby from his back. Boots hung tight, while Adam recovered from the blow. He shook his giant head, and then leaped up to make another run at the gargoyle. He plowed into Gary's chest. Boots lunged off to one side as Gary fell, and narrowly missed being turned into a cat pancake. His job done, he raced over to me and wrapped around my legs. "Nice work, Bootsy. Remind me to give you double portions in the morning." Boots puffed out his tawny chest. Adam growled, low and menacing, as he pinned Gary to the ground for the final time. I raced over to where Gary had fallen, murmured a binding spell, and cinched his wrists together. Adam, still in dog form, pounced all of his weight onto Gary's chest. Gary groaned at the impact of the 160-pound dog, and I grinned over at Adam. He couldn't speak in his beast form, but his dark eyes were expressive and strangely Adam-like. I didn't look down at Gary, not wanting to get caught in his stone spell. "You should have left me alone, Gary." "Shut up, witch." Adam leaned down and growled, inches above the gargoyle's face. Gary blanched. "Well, I guess this actually worked out well for you. You'll get taken out of Beechwood Harbor at least. However, I don't think you're going to like your reassignment locale very much." I laughed to myself. "From what I hear, the supernatural protection prison doesn't exactly have 5-star accommodations. A nasty gargoyle like you will probably be locked up in a steel box for the rest of your life. Which should be what? Another couple of centuries or so? Wowzers. That's a long time to sit and do nothing. Don't you think, Adam?" The dog smiled and nodded. "For what? Attacking a witch?" Gary spat. I leaned over and bared my own teeth. "No, for murdering a human. I all but heard your confession on the phone." "I didn't kill that human." I rocked back onto my heels. "Then why were you talking about it?" He glared at me, and the electric blue rimmed his dark pupils. "I'm not telling you anything, witch." "You have 2 choices, Gary." I spun on my heels and paced beside him. "Drop your magic, and we can have a civilized conversation, and in exchange for your information, I'll let you go, and not call this one into the SPA. Otherwise, I'll just go call my agent right now." Truthfully, I didn't want to call the attack into SPA. My agent Harvey would probably kick a leprechaun if he found out that I was tangled up with a gargoyle on the front yard of the manor. I'd already made him work hard for every gold coin in his retirement fund, thanks to the other messes he'd mopped up on my behalf. "What do you say, Gary? You tell me what you know about the murder and I let you go?" I paused and then added, "And, of course, you leave the manor tonight and never come back again." Gary growled. "Fine. Now tell your hound to get off of me." I glanced at Adam, and he shook his head once. I turned my attention back at the pinned gargoyle. "Oh, no. I think Adam will stay right here." "Adam?" Gary spat. I laughed. If you had ever bothered to say more than 5 words to any of us, you would know that Adam is a shifter. This is his beast form. He groaned. "Fine, witch. What do you want to know?" I knelt down beside him, and he rolled his eyes toward me. They were still icy blue, but this time the only source of light came from the orb I'd conjured to follow Boots around the side of the yard when we'd first set out on our errand. The unnatural blue from Gary's internal magic had faded. "Why don't you start by telling me more about that phone call? Who were you talking to?" Gary ground his teeth, and I winced, hoping he'd retracted his fangs first. Otherwise, ouch. "I was talking to Daryl, my SPA agent." "About killing Peg Holloway?" "No, I told you it wasn't me." He tried to sit up, but Adam pressed down with his paws, not willing to give him an inch. Gary glowered at the dog, and then flicked his irate eyes back to me.
I didn't kill anyone. But yes, I was there.
My eyes widened, and my heart thumped a little faster. What happened? I prompted, and waved my fingers so he knew I wanted to hear the rest of the information as quickly as possible.
I was cruising through town. It was pretty late. Not a lot of people out. Anyway, I heard an argument and wanted to see what was going on.
And the argument was in the alley behind the coffee shop. He nodded. Between Peg and... I was running low on patience. Gary had the answers I needed, and I was about to let Adam have a go. Maybe nipping at his fingers would get him talking.
That old bat from the store next door.
My mind flashed, like a pop of a camera bulb. Greta? Gary grinned.
They were arguing about something stupid. I landed on the roof of one of the shops, just to listen in. I thought maybe I'd scare them, just for kicks. This town is super boring.
My hand exploded with a spell before I even fully realized what I'd done. My emotions were getting the best of me and taking over. Gary yelped at the sting of my magic, and his eyes flashed bright again.
I'm done talking, witch.
He shoved up against Adam, but Adam jumped, ramming his 2 front paws that were roughly the size of salad plates on each of Gary's shoulders. He growled low and bore his teeth again. Gary flashed his fangs and let out a deep, rumbled growl of his own. Batwings! Knock it off, you two! You're going to wake up all the neighbors. If you keep growling like that, we're going to have whack jobs out here looking for Bigfoot. Adam glared at Gary, who remained silent. Gary, don't test me. You won't like what happens if you cross me. We made a deal. Finish telling me your story. What did you see? His eyes flickered again, and he refused to look at me. I wasn't sure if it was supposed to be a sign of disrespect or if he was keeping his magic off of me. I didn't care. As long as his lips started moving, we weren't going to have a problem.
The taller one, Peg, as you said, she was unloading some stuff from her car and had left it running. The short, squat one was lecturing her about exhaust fumes being bad for her plants.
I rolled my eyes. Gary wasn't lying. That sounded just like Greta.
The tall one, Peg, she was angry. She started railing on the short one. She even slapped her across the face. That's when things got good.
Gary smiled. A cruel, bloodthirsty smile that made my insides turn to jelly.
The short one made her pay for that, that's for sure. She took a bottle of something from the box in the car and swung it right at the tall one's head. She missed the first time. The bottle hit the car and shattered into a million pieces. That's when that awful stench reached me. I was about to leave because the smell was making me sick, but I wanted to watch the rest of the fight. So I took to the air. I stayed low. I figured they wouldn't see me because they were going at it like old alley cats fighting over a box of fish.
He cackled, apparently deeply entertained by the violent tale. My stomach turned at the images he was painting. I drew in a steadying breath. Then what?
The taller one. She realized what the short one had tried to do, and she started running, screaming bloody murder about calling the cops. All that. So, the short one grabbed another bottle and slammed it into the back of her head as she tried to get away.
I shuddered, and Adam whined low and nudged me with his nose. That's awful. Gary smirked.
It was the most fun I've had since moving in here.
You're sick. You know that? Gary's eyes flashed.
I can't help what I am, witch. I'm a gargoyle, an ancient species that has thrived for thousands of years. We've survived every human revolution, and will continue to do so. Why? Because we're unafraid of violence. We welcome it, embrace it. You don't see our kind getting burned at the stake or drowned in backwater rivers."
"Enough," I snapped, hovering a ball of magic above my hand for him to see. "Tell me the rest of what you saw, or this is for you." Gary considered me, his cold eyes flashing with a hint of magic again. But he looked at my hand, the power it held, and stopped. His eyes returned to normal.
"The short one ran to her shop, locked the door, and left. I don't know where she went. I was going to follow her, but when I lifted up above the eaves of the building, I heard a scream."
"Who screamed?"
"Some lady walking her dog. She saw me in the sky,"
Gary huffed.
"This has happened before. It's the reason I was shipped to this podunk nowhereville town in the first place."
Considering that Gary stayed in his room nearly 24 hours a day, it was hard for me to understand why he cared what the town around him looked like. It wasn't like he spent much time out in it. "Then what?"
"I'm done with this. I've told you all there is to know, witch,"
he hissed. Adam growled, low and deep. That was Gary's last warning. I grit my teeth. "What happened next, Gary?" He scoffed, an impatient sound.
"She screamed, and her little dog went off the deep end. It started barking its head off. Normally, when I fly, I can use my magic to shield myself. I also fly high enough that most people wouldn't notice against the dark sky, but I wasn't thinking about it."
"What did you do?" He laughed.
"I thought about killing them. The dog probably would have made a nice snack."
Adam dug his paws into Gary's shoulders.
"I left. I flew away. I spent the next few days here, holed up in my room, trying to work my SPA contacts to get a reassignment."
I shook my head. Something wasn't quite clicking together. "Why do you want to be reassigned? You just told us you don't care about violence, and it doesn't appear as though you have much, if any, respect for humans."
"Yeah. Well, in case you haven't noticed, I hate it here. Especially after your ghost pal went off her rocker the other day. I've had enough. Someone seeing me is the only way I can really get relocated. SPA will move me to a new town and send in mind wipers to take care of the damage. I wasn't trying to get caught, but hey, call it a silver lining. I can start over and not have to deal with this halfway house of freaks for another single day."
I rocked back onto my heels. "Wow. So you don't even really care that someone was murdered? Were you planning to tell anyone what you saw?"
"Nope. I'm not getting dragged into this. I just want to get out of this house. Away from you,"
he said, glaring at me before shifting his gaze toward Adam.
"And you. And, most of all, that princess vampire and the crazy ghost. This place is a nightmare. And believe me, I know what nightmares are really made of."
"You are the only nightmare in Beechwood Harbor. And now your time is up." He scoffed.
"I have to wait for my SPA agent to get me papers."
"That's not my problem, Gary. Our deal was that you leave town. Tonight. I'm not spending one more night in this house with you lurking around. I won't call SPA and turn you in for attacking me, my familiar, or Adam. In exchange, you leave. Now." I pushed up from the ground and wiped at the knees of my leggings, which were sopping wet from the dewy ground. Boots swept in to stand in front of me, and I smiled down at his determined expression as he stared in Gary's direction. "Adam, come on." Adam glanced up at me. He gave Gary one more low growl, and then stepped off of him and came to stand at my side. In his beast form, he nearly came up to my hip. It was the perfect size for a guard dog. Gary sprang up from the ground and flapped his wings, stretching them out after they'd been crumpled underneath him all that time. He glared at me, Adam, and Boots each in turn before turning his glowering eyes back on me.
You've made a dangerous enemy tonight, Holly Bolt. I'm not going to forget this.
Neither will I, Gary. And you know something? You were wrong about what you said. My people, witches and wizards, have been persecuted over the years, but we're still here. We've survived without resorting to murder and mass destruction. That speaks more to our strength than to any weakness you may perceive. Our kind helped create the Haven systems to ensure a place of safety for all supernaturals. We created synthetic blood to provide nourishment for vampires and other creatures that rely on human blood for survival. We've worked to eliminate fighting and violence, but that doesn't mean we can't use it when necessary. Gary stared at me.
Is that a threat?
I will do you no harm tonight, Gary. But if I ever see you again, you can be sure that I will be prepared, and it won't end in a tussle on the front yard. He snarled, showcasing his fangs.
I'm not afraid of you, witch.
I shrugged. That's your mistake to make. I've said all I'm going to. Now get away from here. I called forth all the power I could harness, summoning a powerful blocking spell with both hands, and then spread them wide, forming an arc over the yard. From end to end of the property's perimeter, the spell went forth and took hold. Gary smiled, not realizing what I'd just cast. But before any further cruel barbs could fly from his lips, he was flung backwards. He sailed over the manor, a shadow against the sliver of moonlight, and crashed in a crumpled heap on the street. He righted himself and let out a furious howl. He charged at the manor, but as soon as he reached the perimeter, he was kicked back further than before. Beside me, Adam barked, a smile on his canine face. I glanced down at him, grinning from ear to ear. I wanted to know how the house did it with the steps the other day. I did a little digging when I was cooking up the security wards for keeping Nick away. He barked and wagged his tail. It obviously got his mark of approval. Gary tried once again, but was thrown halfway down the block. If he attempted it again, things would become infinitely more painful. Something inside of him must have sensed that part of the magic. He brushed himself off, let out a howl, and took to the skies. Adam, Boots, and I watched as he disappeared into the night. I smiled down at Adam. Thank you. He inclined his head, and then trotted off toward the front door. Boots followed. I waited another minute, reveling in the powerful pulse of my spell, and then smiled as I went inside with my friends. Chapter 22. I still can't believe it was Greta. An hour had passed since Gary had revealed the truth of the murder, and we were both still stunned by his confession.
Well, we don't know for sure,
Adam corrected, settling into the chair opposite mine at the kitchen table. He had 3 sandwiches piled on a small white plate. He grinned when he caught me staring at them.
Like I said, it relaxes me.
He bit into the first one with vigor. I couldn't even imagine eating. The adrenaline crash was making me nauseated. I kept playing back all the ways the fight with Gary could have ended. None of them were pretty. Instead of food, I went straight to the tea and made myself a cup of my calming blend. I mixed the herbs with a lazy twirl of my finger above the steaming liquid. Well, then, I'd say you earned them.
You too.
He grinned conspiratorially at me.
That spell you cast was totally badass.
I smiled. I'm glad you liked it. I have to say it worked even better than I expected. I'll have to thank Posey for the inspiration. Adam chuckled and wolfed down the second half of his sandwich in one bite. Boots was across the kitchen, reveling in his own spoils of war. I'd gifted him with an entire can of tuna, and he was wasting no time gobbling it all up.
Boots did pretty good too, huh? I'll never doubt your fighting chops again, Mr. Boots.
Adam gave the oblivious cat a salute. He did it all for the tuna, I joked, smiling at his happy expression as he stuck his face deeper into his ceramic bowl to get every last morsel. Adam laughed, and then went to work on his second sandwich. I'm just glad I was nearby. I hate to think what would have happened otherwise. He shuddered. I mean, you're a tough witch, but... No offense taken, I said, raising my hand. I was getting my butt kicked. When he had me pinned, it was like I was made of stone. I couldn't move. I couldn't use my magic. And those eyes. A shiver snaked down my spine at the memory. I don't want to keep thinking about what would have happened if you hadn't shown up. Adam gave me a grim look. What were you doing there in the first place? I sighed and pushed my hair back out of my eyes. I was trying to harvest some sprigs from my heartsong plant. I need it for a truth-be-told potion. Well, needed. I suppose it's kind of pointless now. Why's that? I sipped my tea, letting the warmth and the herbal blend soothe my frazzled nerves. Because I was going to use it to get my boss, Philip Tanner, to confess to murdering Peg. Oh, Adam said, his lips holding a small circle for a long moment. Yeah. So obviously I don't need the potion anymore. My eyes went to the clock on the wall behind Adam's head. It was almost 1:30 in the morning. Mystery solved. Adam nodded solemnly. Did the police even question Greta? I don't know. Her shop's right next door, so maybe they asked if she saw anything. But I doubt it was much of a questioning. I mean, it's no secret she and Peg weren't BFFs, but I doubt she crossed anyone's radar for being capable of the murder. If anything, she's more likely to be the victim of an attack. Adam chuckled softly. True. I remember one time I was walking by her shop and she came out of her store just to tell me that my posture was atrocious. I suppressed a smile. It is pretty bad, you know. Ha ha, very funny. You try switching between life on 4 paws and 2 legs and see how you do. Fair enough, I replied, my eyes twinkling with amusement. He leaned back and tore into his next sandwich. So, what now? He asked, before popping the bite into his mouth. I honestly don't know. I need to find something linking her to the crime. I can't exactly use Gary's testimony. The police would laugh me right out of the station. On top of that, it's hearsay. Adam lifted his brows. Look at you, little Miss Law and Order. I grinned. I know a little. If Greta was there, wouldn't her shoes have the peppermint syrup on them too? Gary said she got into her car and drove off. So maybe the police could test her gas pedal for the stuff. You know how hard it is to get rid of. I nodded. He had a point. But the problem was that I couldn't get Chief Lincoln to search Greta's car. Not without telling him what I heard. Even an anonymous tip probably wouldn't get much traction. What about the lady who saw Gary flying? I perked up. If she was close by, maybe she heard part of the argument. Exactly. That would put the spotlight on Greta. Everyone knows her voice. He shuddered as though hearing it inside his head. Like nails on a chalkboard. The straw! I clapped my hands, and Adam and Boots both snapped to attention. I winced at the loud sound. Sorry, but the straw. Remember when you were there in the alley? You said you smelled straw, peppermint, and blood. Greta lives on a huge nursery outside of town. She grows most of her own stock. She has horses, too, from what I've been told. It has to be straw from her shoes or clothes. Adam nodded. It makes sense. But the back of her store is in the alley, too. She walks that path all the time. I deflated a little. He was right. It wasn't much of a clue, and again, I couldn't go to Chief Lincoln and tell him my shifter friend and roommate had sniffed it out for me. I wasn't even supposed to have been at the crime scene that night. How are we supposed to find the lady who overheard the argument? Gary just said it was a lady with a dog. And even though I heard Mrs. Grady talking about seeing a strange man that night, she didn't say anything about him flying. I don't know how to narrow it down. I mean, half the population of Beechwood Harbor has dogs. Adam nodded, mulling it over. We both stared at our hands for a moment. Adam fidgeted with the third sandwich on his plate, and I twisted my teacup around in circles against the tabletop. There had to be a way to prove Greta was the murderer. She couldn't get away with this. And I'd be damned if I'd let Cassie take the fall for a murder because a cheap garbage bag broke on her shoes.
"What if you made the truth potion?" Adam said after a long beat.
I looked up. Why? We already know who the murderer is.
Right?
He nodded, picking up steam as he mapped out the plan forming in his head.
But we need Chief Lincoln to believe us. If you slip Greta the potion and get her talking,
I could get her to confess. If we record it, we can give that to the chief and he'll have to arrest her. Or at least investigate her, and then he might find the peppermint syrup in her car.
Exactly.
Adam? That's genius. He gave a half-cocked smile and mimed like he was popping his collar, though he was wearing a t-shirt.
"Every once in a while I use this thing for more than winning over the ladies," he said, tapping his temple.
I laughed. Thank goodness. He took a celebratory bite into his last sandwich. There's just one problem.
"What?"
he asked around his generous bite. I wilted in my chair. I need the heart song, and it's long past midnight. I'll have to wait until tomorrow to get some. Then the potion alone takes 3 days to brew. By that time, Cassie will probably have a nervous breakdown from Chief Lincoln and his deputies following her everywhere. Or else she'll be in jail. Adam groaned.
"Because of the shoes?"
I nodded. It sounds like it's the only clue he has so far. Adam took another bite and mulled it over.
"Are there any other potions that would have the same effect? Maybe something that would lower her inhibitions a little? If you're there to guide her through the questions, maybe you don't need a full truth potion. You just need something to loosen her lips a little."
Possibly. I searched through my mind, considering potions and ideas one at a time and then discarding them, until I remembered seeing something in my handbook earlier. I know! The tension tamer that I put in my tea sometimes. It has a relaxing quality. I could try to isolate the herb that triggers that reaction, up the dosage, and bam! Adam grinned at me.
"I knew you could figure it out."
I stared at him, and my skin flushed. The entire array of emotions from the night washed over me, and I was exhilarated and exhausted all at once. Adam, thanks again for being there tonight. You saved my life. Boots's too. He smiled and reached out for my hand. He set his on top of mine, and his thumb stroked over my knuckles. It was a soft but intensely sweet gesture, and my heart fluttered wildly, like a butterfly caged behind my ribs.
"I'll always be there for you, Holly. Whatever you need."
My mouth went dry. I swallowed hard as my brain reached for the right response. But before I could land on something intelligent, the door flew open with a loud burst. Lacey stumbled into the kitchen and scowled at the sight of Adam and me sitting there. "What are you two doing down here?" She craned around to look at the clock on the wall. "Isn't this a little past your bedtime, Holly?" Adam glared at her.
"We're allowed to be in the kitchen anytime we want to, Lacey."
Lacey narrowed her eyes at Adam. "Guys, please," I begged, my voice soft and exhausted. "I'm in no mood to play referee to you two right now." Adam shrugged and polished off the last of his sandwich, which was either filled with marshmallow fluff or a nauseating amount of mayonnaise. Either way, Lacey and I both wrinkled our noses as he chowed down. She stalked past him, the words, "mangy mutt," barely audible as she swept to the fridge. "Gary's no longer a tenant," I offered as a segue. "Good." She pulled away from the fridge, a can of O-positive in her hands. She tapped her long pink nail against the side of the can a few times before cracking it open and drinking deeply. Apparently, Adam and I weren't the only ones having a rough night. I'd never seen her drink directly from the can before. She took another long sip, and then looked over at me and Adam again. "What happened?" She crossed the kitchen and took the chair at the foot of the table, listening intently as I gave her the rundown of the attack. I left out the details of Peg's murder. "Nasty gargoyle. I should have known that's what he was," she sneered. "There was a pair of them that lived at the haven I was in before coming here. They were always bragging about attacking mortals. No one knew if they were serious or just full of it. But I always had a bad feeling about them. Ugh, to think I lived that close to one all these months." She shuddered before soothing herself with another long drink from her can of fake blood. "Well, he's gone now." Adam laughed. "And Holly cast some badass magic to keep him away from the manor." Lacey lifted her brows at me. "Impressive." Did Lacey just compliment me? This was officially the weirdest night of my life. "Thanks." I smiled at Adam. "Well, we still need to figure out what to do with him. We can't just let him run loose in the neighborhood." I promised I wouldn't call the SPA, but I couldn't help it if someone else did. I gave Lacey a pointed gaze. "A concerned citizen, perhaps?" She smiled. "Oh, I've been meaning to call my agent for a while. I could put a bug in his ear about a rogue gargoyle." "Excellent." I grinned at her. Adam chuckled. "That's really cool of you, Lacey." She rose from her place at the table, rinsed her can in the sink, and then stalked back to the door. She stopped short, one hand on the swinging door, and glanced back at us. "One thing before I go." Uh-oh. I knew her offer to help was too good to be true. "What?" She smiled sweetly. "If I do this favor for you, then you both have to do a favor for me." "Crap," Adam mumbled. "Okay, Lacey, that's fair," I said, ignoring Adam. "What would you like?" "No more cracks about my pageants." My lips quirked with the effort of holding back a laugh, but I kept a straight face and nodded. "Deal." Her eyes darted to Adam, narrowing slightly. I'd been known to join in the mockery, but Adam was always the instigator. He looked at me, and my eyes flashed. Okay. He turned his attention to Lacey. "No more jokes about the pageants." "Thank you." She pushed out of the kitchen, and moments later her footsteps sounded on the old staircase. "That was very good of you, Adam." He gave me a mischievous smile. "I said I wouldn't make jokes about the pageants. She didn't say anything about making jokes about her tiara collection, glittery dresses, or cheesy speeches." I rolled my eyes. "You really are impossible. You know that, right?" His grin spread wider. I pushed up from the table, drained the last of my tea, and sauntered to the sink to rinse out my cup. Boots was meticulously cleaning his face and whiskers on the cat bed tucked into the corner of the kitchen by the back door, but as soon as he realized I was leaving, he jumped up to follow after me. "Good night, Adam," I called behind me as the door swung shut. Chapter 23. The next morning I sprang out of bed, ignoring the protests of my exhausted muscles, every one of them sore after the fight with Gary. I didn't have time to waste if I was going to execute my plan. I pulled on a pair of jeans and a long-sleeved shirt and swept my unruly hair back into a long ponytail that hung halfway down my back. The house was quiet. Lacey and Adam were likely still sleeping off the late night. I wondered if Posey knew that Gary was gone. If Lacey had followed through with her part of the bargain, then the SPA powers that be would no doubt be contacting Posey. However they did that, to fill her in on the particulars. I knew that sooner or later I would need to go to her and explain things from my side, but that would have to wait. "Come on, Boots," I said, patting my leg as I walked in front of the place he was lounging. "Unless you're still in a tuna coma?" He raised his head a fraction of an inch. His amber-colored eyes opened, but then drooped back shut again. I huffed. "I'm only letting you sleep because you were my fuzzy little hero last night. Just this once." I patted him on the head and left the bedroom. I went through the kitchen to go out the back door and cut across the grass to my greenhouse. It was surreal being in the same place I'd been the night before when everything had broken loose. It all made sense in hindsight. Gary's reclusive tendencies, the stomping on the floor above my room, and his cold manner. Beechwood Harbor was lucky to be a boring town. I hated to think what could have happened if he'd stayed much longer, especially as he grew more restless. Eventually, he would have probably acted on his desires. He certainly hadn't let on that he had a heart or any sign of a conscience inside of him. He was cold-blooded and could have done a lot of damage. I just hoped that whoever had seen him wasn't going to go poking around too deeply into figuring out what it was she saw swooping through the sky, especially if that involved going to the local private investigator. At the thought of Nick, I sighed heavily. I pushed into the greenhouse, tossed an orb of light into the room to chase away the early morning gloom, and went to work harvesting from my supplies. The idea that had popped into my head in the early hours of the morning was still coming together. I wasn't sure of the dosage or ratios of ingredients just yet. Luckily, the larkspur gifted me with potion knowledge that was instinctual. Of course, I could always open the locket and call on Grandmother Honeysuckle for assistance, but I preferred to hold on to that option as a last resort. She would probably only want to discuss my dating life, or lack thereof, anyway. When my basket was full of everything I thought I might need, I extinguished the ball of light and went back inside the manor. The kitchen was, thankfully, still empty. I set my basket beside the sink and flicked my fingers to seal the kitchen doors. I didn't want anyone disturbing me. The potion was custom, and brewing it would require my full attention. I couldn't have Adam or Lacey coming in and distracting me. Posey could come in regardless of the locks, but she usually left me alone when I was working. At the sink, I went to work, prepping and cleaning the herbs and plant materials that I'd collected. A large garden window looked out over the property, and my mind drifted to the relief I'd felt when Adam's beast had barreled out through the tree line and tackled Gary. I'd never been much for the damsel in distress role, but if there was one person I wanted to have at my back, it was Adam. My skin flushed as I replayed his valiant role in the events from the night, the way he'd bared his teeth and growled when Gary insulted me, how he'd been willing to battle an ancient gargoyle to defend me. He'd risked his own life. For me. I sighed. "What now, Holly?" I didn't have an answer to my own question. Adam was clearly interested in me, but he was such a shameless flirt it was hard to tell if he was just interested because I was one of the few females in town that hadn't immediately fallen for his charm. My heart fluttered again, thinking back to the way he'd looked at me from across the table, and the way his thumb had brushed over the back of my hand. His words came back to me, echoing through my mind like a whisper. "I'll always be there for you, Holly." "I really need to work on an anti-blushing spell," I muttered to myself. I shook off thoughts of Adam and his chocolate brown eyes and the lines that formed around his mouth when he smiled. Focus! I momentarily debated stinging myself with a blast of magic. I gathered the supplies in my hands and took everything to the stove, then set the cutting board filled with freshly chopped herbs to one side and conjured a flame under my kettle. While the kettle heated, I opened the cupboards and decided what to add to create a base for the potion itself. I absently hummed a song as I set to work, adding ingredients carefully and cautiously tallying things up in my head as I went along. The trick would be making it effective enough to get Greta to talk, while balancing out the sleeping agent that would make her too drowsy to carry on a conversation. Halfway through, I stepped away from the stove to let the kettle simmer. Something was off. The feeling in my gut was telling me there was something I was missing. With a sigh, I came to grips with what I needed to do next. I removed the larkspur from around my neck, dropped into a kitchen chair, and popped the locket open. The foggy coating on the small mirror cleared, and the figure waiting on the other side came into sharp focus. "Hello, Grandmother Honeysuckle," I said, smiling warmly. "Who are you?" Bat wings. I figured since we had spoken so recently we wouldn't have to go through this again. Apparently, that wasn't how the magic worked. After a few minutes, I got Honeysuckle on track and moved on to asking my questions. "Great-Grandmother Honeysuckle, what would you add to a tension tamer potion to make it have a truth-telling effect?" Her wrinkled face crumpled in thought. "Why not make a truth-be-told potion? Much more effective than messing with coltsfoot and cedar ash." I nodded and nibbled on my bottom lip. A bubble burst in the kettle and stole my attention for a moment. "Yes, I know, but what if that wasn't an option?" "What are you up to, young lady?" She narrowed her eyes at me. This was a mistake. Mistake or not, I needed answers. I dragged in a breath and then said, "I'm in the middle of a murder investigation, Grandmother." "Are you still working with those SPA people? Make them get you the potion." "No, Grandmother, it's a human murder investigation." I pressed my eyes shut, waiting for the berating to begin. Good witches weren't supposed to attract attention. They were to fly under the radar of humans. To my surprise, Honeysuckle chuckled. My eyes popped open and I found her smiling at me. "I knew you had some spunk, Holly Bolt. You're just like your mother." I didn't want to think about my mother. It hurt too much. I drew in a deep breath and continued. "Can you help me? I need to get the murderer to confess so that my friend won't be mistakenly arrested in her place." Honeysuckle nodded. Yes, dear. Of course I can help." Relief flooded through me. Another heat pocket burst, and I hopped up from my place at the table to go investigate. I gawked at the contents of the kettle, which had turned a violent shade of green. Normally, my tension tamer tea had a transparent green tinge to it, like green tea. This was something else entirely. "Grandmother, look." I flipped the locket around so that she could see into the kettle. As she investigated, I rattled off everything I had added and the amounts of each ingredient. I turned the locket around and found that she was still smiling. "Add some peppermint." I turned my nose up at the idea. I had the feeling I'd smelled enough peppermint to last me a few centuries. But I did as she said, after finding a pinch of dried peppermint leaves in a jar from the tea cabinet. "Stir 3 times, clockwise, of course." I did as she said, and marveled as the green shifted, evening out to more or less what I had expected. "Then go out to the greenhouse and get the leaf of the heart song. As you well know, the heart song has to be harvested at midnight, but the leaves can be gathered at any time and have a similar effect as the blossom itself. They're just less potent." "Really?" Grandmother Honeysuckle arched a thin brow at me. "Don't question me, girl. Go get the leaf. Chop it fine and add it 1 piece at a time. Stir 3 times, counter this time. Then you'll have what you need." I peered over the side of the kettle, still shocked at how easily Honeysuckle had solved my problem. Maybe it was worth going through the trouble to contact her more often. I smiled and turned my attention back to her figure in the locket. "Thank you, Great-Grandmother. You have no idea how much I needed your help." She puffed out her chest with pride. "Of course, dear. Now, be warned, the potion will not last you nearly as long as the truth be told. You'll need to work quickly to get your confession. And It's very important that you get it right the first time. If you dose someone with any potion containing heart song more than once, you'll scramble their brains for good." I winced. I thought that was just a scare tactic the professors used to keep us from making it at the academy. "No, my girl, it's very real, especially with humans, frail little things that they are." I stifled a laugh. Grandmother Honeysuckle was of the generation that kept segregated from humans entirely. These days, the Havens allowed all supernaturals to interact with humans, and most found it to be a beneficial change, as it opened entirely new ways of life and, perhaps more importantly, commerce. "Thank you again." She gave a nod. "Goodbye, dear, and good luck." I closed the locket softly, checked the kettle once more, and then raced out to collect the heart song leaf. By the time I completed Honeysuckle's instructions, the potion was clear, with barely a hint of the green color. I bottled up the batch, figuring that if it worked as expected, it might come in handy. I labeled it Loose Lips and slipped a small vial of the potion into my jeans pocket before I finished cleaning up my workspace. With the potion ready, there was just one more thing I needed to secure in order to pull off my plan. Chapter 24.
Okay, you want to run that all by me again?
"Nick," I sighed. "I'm asking for your help in getting a confession from Peg's murderer." I'd waited until 8 o'clock before going downtown to an old log cabin that had been converted into a small professional building. The squat, square structure was home to the town's dentist, accountant, and now Beechwood Harbor's very own private investigator. I had originally set out for Nick's condo building, using the address listed on his glossy business card, but as I was crossing through town, I spotted him carting a hand truck along the sidewalk and through the front doors of the small complex. Only then did I notice that the sign out front had been changed to include his name. I followed him to his new office in the back corner of the home. Nick jumped about a foot in the air when I knocked on his door, but he ushered me in right away. He even dragged in a vinyl chair from the hallway for me to sit in, explaining that most of his furniture hadn't arrived yet. So far, all he had set up was a card table that seemed to serve as his desk, another vinyl chair parked behind it in lieu of a proper office chair, and a stack of cardboard boxes lined up along the wall. I leaned forward in the stiff, uncomfortable chair and locked my eyes with Nick's. "I know that Greta killed Peg. I just need help proving it. Now, I'm not a big-shot investigator, but I figure the best way to prove her guilt is to get a taped confession." Nick pinched his brows together, as though it was physically causing him pain to try and figure out what I was talking about.
"I get that part. And you're right, a taped confession would be pretty hard to ignore. But what I'm having a real hard time understanding is the part where you came to the conclusion that Greta is the killer. I mean, she's a nice old lady with a flower shop." I snorted. "First of all, it's a gardening supply shop, and secondly, you obviously haven't been exposed to the particular breed of delightful that is Greta McCoy. She is far from being a nice old lady." He held up a hand. "Okay, that aside, you still haven't given me the full story," he countered. He placed his elbows on the desk and leaned forward, eager for the tale. "Last time we talked, you were convinced it was Philip Tanner. Why the sudden change? Tell me why you think it was her."
Bat wings. There was no way I could explain it to him and not sound insane. But I needed him to believe me. "There was a witness," I started, treading carefully on some seriously thin ice. Nick frowned.
"Police Chief Lincoln never mentioned a witness."
"I know." I licked my lips nervously. "They didn't come forward to the police."
"But they talked to you."
Nick raised an eyebrow. I nodded. "They told me that they heard Greta and Peg arguing, which, if you don't know, was pretty much a daily occurrence. But this was different. Peg slapped Greta somewhere in the middle of things. Greta took a bottle of peppermint syrup and swung at Peg. When she missed, Peg ran for her life, but Greta got her in the back of the head." You know the rest." Nick nodded, his expression unreadable. "Nick, come on." I tapped my nails impatiently on the desk. "You know that I just want to solve this thing. What would be my motive for making all of this up?"
You want your friend's name cleared. Isn't that the only reason you're involved at all?
Bats. He had a point there. Okay, time for a new tactic. I leaned forward and gave him my best smile. "Just imagine what it would be like if you're the one who goes to the police with the killer's confession on tape. You'll have an in with them. Big time. I mean, they'd pretty much have to take your investigation chops seriously after that, wouldn't they?" Nick nodded slowly, turning over my statement. He sat back in his chair, his eyes flashing at me every couple of seconds. I tried to button my lips and let him process. I could taste it. He was about to crack and give in to my wacky plan. "Nick."
"Okay, fine. Let's say I buy this. How are you going to get Greta to talk? From the sound of things, you two aren't exactly best friends."
I shrugged. "She barely knows me."
"Okay. And?" he prompted. "That doesn't exactly help our cause."
"You know a lot about killers, right?"
"Well, I wouldn't say a lot, but yes, I took some criminal psychology courses."
"Perfect." I clapped my hands together. "Okay. When someone kills someone else, they have remorse, or maybe they want to gloat. They want to talk about it in some way. Usually, right?"
"I would imagine."
He eyed me, unsure of where I was headed. "Okay. So if someone, say a neutral third party, started asking questions, they might be able to unravel the truth. I could tap into Greta's emotions over the murder." Nick shook his head.
"But how, Holly?"
I sighed. It was time to play my last card. "You know what? Maybe this was a mistake." I pushed up from the hard chair. "I'm sorry I bothered you, Nick. I wanted your help with this because you have a connection with the police. But if you're too busy moving and all that, I understand."
"Holly."
He jumped to his feet as I started for the door.
"Wait."
I paused at the door. With a smile, I turned around to face Nick. He raked a hand through his unruly hair.
"I'll go with you, okay?"
"And you'll record the whole conversation?"
"Yes."
"Great. Let's go." He studied me for a long moment, as though realizing he had just played right into my hand. He sighed and grabbed the jacket draped over the back of his makeshift office chair. He shrugged into it and then crossed over to retrieve something from one of the boxes stacked along the wall. He held up a small button and clipped it onto the cuff of his jacket.
"This thing should do the trick. It's actually a microphone. I have an app on my phone that will record whatever it picks up. I'll start recording right before we walk in."
I marveled at the small button. There was no way Greta, or anyone else, would know what we were up to. I smiled at Nick. "It's perfect."
"I just hope you're right about this."
"I am." He gave me a weary look, but held out his hand toward the door.
"Lead the way."
"That's our first stop," I said, pointing at Siren's song when we arrived at the Old Town Harbor shops. Nick, with a puzzled expression, went ahead and pulled open the door for me. I slipped inside, and he followed. Cassie was at the counter, picking at the bottom half of a banana nut muffin, staring into space. She didn't even look up at the sound of the bell on the front door. We approached the counter, and she finally looked up. She straightened when she saw us and ran her fingers over her apron. I gave her a small smile. "Hey, Cass. How's it going?" "Sorry," she said, continuing to brush away crumbs from her front and then the counter. "I didn't even hear you come in." "Don't worry about it. This is Nick. You remember him." "Yes. Hello, Nick. Can I get you something to drink?" She gave him the best smile she could muster. Nick glanced at me out of the corner of his eye. I nodded, and he shifted his attention over to Cassie.
"A large mocha, please?"
"Sure thing. You, Halls?" "A large Kona? And then a medium caramel latte with an extra pump of vanilla. Cassie raised her brows at me as she wrote the order in permanent marker down the side of the signature ocean blue cups. That's Greta's drink, isn't it? I nodded. I wanted to talk to her about something. I figured a coffee would butter her up. Cassie was still looking at me like I'd lost my mind. Trust me, Cass. Okay, she replied, stretching out the word. She turned away and started making the drinks we'd ordered. Is Philip still here? I asked, craning to peek down the dim hallway into the back room. Cassie glanced over and shook her head. No. He called first thing and said he won't be in until tomorrow. I'm not sure why. If you ask me, the sooner we get him back to Idaho, the better. He's scaring away the regulars. What do you mean? He's just gruff. You know how our customers are. They prefer a softer touch. I nodded. That was definitely true. Philip was about as cozy as a drill sergeant wrapped in a fleece blanket. Well, we just have to convince him that we have things under control here, and he'll leave. Then you'll be my boss. I wiggled my eyebrows at her, and she laughed softly. It was nice to see her smile. Your boss? Nick interjected, leaning against the counter. Cassie slid his drink over to him. She left the lid off to showcase her fancy whipped cream swirls and liberal sprinkling of chocolate shavings. I ducked my chin and grinned. Getting fancy, huh? Hey now, she playfully narrowed her eyes at me. I might not be all creative with the latte art, but I am a whiz when it comes to whipped cream. Really? Nick's eyebrows shot halfway up his forehead. I elbowed him in the ribs. He laughed off my jab and took his drink. It's very nice. Thank you, Cassie. She smiled and went to make Greta's drink. Philip Tanner is the new owner of Siren Song, but he doesn't live here, she started, unaware that Nick knew more about Mr. Tanner than probably anyone else in Beechwood Harbor. He's going back to Idaho soon, and I'll be the manager here. Aha! Well, congratulations. That must be exciting. She shrugged, but couldn't hide her smile. It was a big deal for her, especially if the promotion included a pay raise. Within a few minutes, we had the 3 drinks and headed out after paying and saying goodbye to Cassie. Once outside, Nick looked over at me. She's the one that Chief Lincoln has pegged for the murder? I nodded. Ridiculous, isn't it? All I knew was that she wouldn't be for too much longer. Before leaving Siren Song, I'd slipped over to the coffee bar to doctor up my own drink and had dumped the entire vial of makeshift truth potion into Greta's cup. I drew in a deep breath. This had to work. We stopped outside of Greta's shop, and Nick pulled his phone from the pocket of his jeans. He tapped at the screen, and I sipped at my coffee. Nothing to see here, folks. He gave a firm nod. There, got it recording. I sucked in another deep breath, this time shakier, and in hindsight wished that I'd thought to dose my own coffee with something to slow my pulse. It felt like my heart was trying to activate some kind of launch sequence and rocket right out of my chest. Okay, you ready? I feel like I should be asking you that. You look a little green. I nodded. I'm fine. Holly, I'm fine. Okay, yeesh. Nick stepped forward and pulled open Greta's shop door. Here goes nothing, I scoffed as I swept inside the shop. I love your confidence. Nick chuckled, but followed after me. Whatever happened next, he was in. Chapter 25. Nick and I stepped inside Greta's garden, and Greta looked up from where she was crouched in front of the small counter at the other end of the store. The counter had a large cash register, nearly identical to the one we used next door. Beside the register, there was a basket of marigold seeds that were the special of the week. Greta appeared to be working to assemble a display of trowels, carefully hanging the small tools on silver pegs fastened to the front of the counter. The earthy sense of potting soil and mulch mixed with the pungent smell of fertilizer as we strolled further into the store. "I'm not open yet," she said, her tone sharp and frustrated. She slammed another trowel onto the peg. My hours of operation are clearly posted on the door. Nick shot me a wide-eyed look. I nodded and casually sipped my coffee. Yeah, she's a real peach. I plastered on my warmest smile and stepped closer. Good morning, Greta. I know it's a little early. Technically, we had arrived 10 minutes before opening. But I thought I would bring you over a coffee. Things have been a little crazy around here since everything happened. I noticed you haven't made it over next door for one in a while. She pushed up from the floor and brushed her calloused hands on the apron that hung around her thick waist. As always, she was dressed casually in well-worn jeans, a dark blue turtleneck, and her embroidered apron that had the name of her shop scrawled across the deep pocket in sunflower yellow. Her dark brown eyes alternated between Nick and me for a moment. "What is it?" she asked, gesturing at the extra cup in my hand. "It's your favorite. A caramel latte with extra vanilla." I smiled sweetly, offering it to her. She hesitated a moment, and then lunged like a greedy badger and practically snatched the cup from my hand. She pressed her eyes closed for a moment and took a long, lingering sniff from the opening at the front of the lid. "Now drink it," I silently pleaded. I needed her to get enough of the potion in her system before I could get to the meat of my visit. "Who are you?" she asked, jutting her round chin in Nick's direction. "You Holly's newest boyfriend?" The question surprised both of us. Nick took a full step back. I bit back a scoff and forced myself to laugh good-naturedly. "No, not at all, Greta." "And newest? What in the world does that mean?" 6 months in, and I was the town harlot. "Excellent work, Holly." "Everyone thinks you're with Adam St. James." "Aha! And why is that?" She pursed her lips as though my question was ridiculous. "People have seen you tootling around town together, looking cozy." I resisted the urge to roll my eyes at the way she said cozy like it was a curse word. If Philip Tanner was a drill sergeant wrapped in a fleece blanket, then Greta McCoy was a cactus with a teddy bear. "And here I thought you were above such idle gossip, Greta." She shrugged. "Well, I hate to disappoint everyone, but no, I am currently unattached." Greta snorted. "I guess it's true what they say about redheads, then." "Excuse me?" I crossed my arms. "And just what is that supposed to mean?" Greta's smile twisted into a cruel grin. "Oh, nothing. It's just an expression, I'm sure." My nostrils flared. I stood up an inch taller and leaned over her so I could look down into her beady little eyes. "I'll have you know, Holly." Nick cleared his throat and tugged at my elbow. I swallowed back the rest of what I'd been about to say and took a step away from Greta. She smiled victoriously. This was her idea of playtime. I ground my teeth and gestured at Nick. "This is Nick Rivers. He's new in town." I gripped my coffee cup tight enough that beads of coffee were popping up through the opening in the plastic lid. Yep, definitely should have thrown in a scoop of tension tamer for myself. Live and learn.
"Ma'am, I was hoping you could offer me some advice,"
Nick said, shifting the topic while I cooled down. "What kind of advice?" she asked, her eyes springing back to him. Nick smiled.
"Gophers, ma'am. I just moved here, and the place I'm renting has a whole bunch of gophers in the backyard. Any ideas on how to get rid of the little buggers?"
I pressed my lips together. All I wanted was for her to drink the blasted coffee so we could get down to business. So far, she hadn't even touched her lips to the lid. She'd been too busy insulting me. Nick must have hit the right button because Greta lit up like a New Year's Eve fireworks show. Her face turned a spectacular shade of purple. "Oh, those little twerps!" She took an excited gulp of her coffee, and relief flooded through me. If Nick could keep her talking, she'd have the whole thing down in no time. I wandered away, letting Greta sip at her coffee in between raving about gophers. I looped around the store, looking over the racks of shovels, rakes, containers, and raised bed kits. By the time I circled back around, I had relaxed enough to try questioning her. As a fringe benefit, I also knew where all the sharp objects were located in case she decided to run her mouth again. I stifled a laugh when I came back and found Nick standing at the counter with an armful of traps and bait. Greta tipped her cup back to get the last drops, and I smiled to myself. Here goes everything. As she started ringing up the gopher gear, I set my coffee cup down and then leaned in to prop my elbows casually against the counter. So, Greta, what do you think about Peg's murder? You're the one person that I haven't asked about it. Seems like that's all anyone wants to talk about anymore. Greta paused, a trap in her hand, hovering above the scanner. Her expression shifted. The corners of her mouth turned down into a severe frown as her eyes met mine. Why would you ask about that? Honestly, Holly, you're the oddest girl I've ever met in my whole life. Ouch. Considering she was drugged up on truth potion, I guess that officially made me odd. I shrugged and pushed off the counter. I was just curious. Everyone has a theory, and I've always considered you to be a well-informed person. I tried not to gag on my own words. Flattering Greta McCoy was physically painful. She went back to scanning, but then slammed the trap down against the counter. Peg got what was coming to her. Nick's eyes popped open. He blinked twice, as though unsure he believed what he just heard. Is that so? I nodded thoughtfully, gathering my coffee cup and taking another sip. Greta growled. Yes, that's so. Peg Holloway was an arrogant, selfish woman who only ever cared about herself. She was that way since we were kids. We went to high school together. Did you know that? I nodded politely. Greta sneered. Yeah, well, she was always bullying people into giving her whatever she wanted. She wanted to be the homecoming queen, and she got all her little friends to bully the rest of us to vote for her. Then she did the same thing for prom queen. She never cared. You should ask that man over there. She paused and thumbed her hand in the direction of Siren's song. Who? Philip Tanner. Philip? I asked, my brow furrowed, struggling to put together the pieces. Greta nodded, her lip protruding like a bulldog. That's right. He went to school with us. Peg wanted him for herself, but he wasn't having any of what she was selling. Years later, he came back around and went off and married her little sister instead. Woo-hoo-hoo! After that, Peg cut off all ties with Jenna. I heard she even stopped paying her for her rightful half of the business when Jenna refused to leave Philip. She was a cold-blooded monster. You mark my words. I blinked furiously, while the puzzle pieces rearranged themselves. So Philip Tanner had been Peg Holloway's high school crush, who ended up falling for her little sister. Nick was tracking on the same page.
What about the accusations? About the way Philip treated Peg's sister?
Greta waved a hand, dismissing the comment. Load of crap. Jenna never reported a thing. Peg just spread those lies because she was jealous. Wow. Nick and I both marveled in unison. Mm-hmm. And really, that was just the tip of the iceberg. I wouldn't be surprised if Peg was the one stealing from her own business and pinning it on that poor girl she was always trampling over. My head was spinning from all the new information Greta was firing off. When she stilled and reached to brush her hands along her forehead, a sense of panic bubbled up inside of me. The potion could be wearing off. We had to hurry. So what you're saying is there could be a number of suspects that the police aren't even looking at? I asked, gently steering the conversation back to the confession I was hunting for. Any idea who did it, though? It was pretty barbaric from what I hear. Weren't you the one who found the body? Greta asked. She dropped her fingers from her forehead and her eyebrows shot up. That's what everyone is saying. That's true. But Peg was already dead. Whoever killed her must have done it right before I got there. I lied, hoping to trap her into correcting me. Greta laughed. Is that what the police are saying? Those morons wouldn't know good police work if they tripped over it. Peg was killed hours before you got there.
How do you know that, Greta? I leaned in and dropped my voice low. Do you know who killed Peg? Greta paused and shook her head, like there was water lodged in her ears. The effect of the potion was definitely fading. It was you, wasn't it, Greta? I whispered. Greta's eyes popped open wide. Her pupils were dilated to the point of making her eyes look black. Hateful. I could feel Nick's nervous energy as he shuffled his feet. All of a sudden, Greta's eyes narrowed into black slits.
Peg deserved that bottle to the back of her head, she hissed,
her voice unlike anything I'd ever heard before, sharp and scratchy. I backed up a small step, and Nick set a hand on my back. The glint in her eyes was pure evil.
Like I said, she never cared about anyone but herself, Greta roared. She had the audacity to move in next door to my shop and act like this was her place all along. She was always undermining me, doing things on purpose to piss me off.
So you killed her, didn't you, Greta? You had to stop her.
That night, she was up to her same old tricks, running the exhaust on her car and blowing that poison right into my open door. That stuff could kill all of my plants. She was trying to put me out of business.
Greta growled. The feral sound set shivers clawing up my spine, but I stood firm, waiting with bated breath for the rest of the story to pour out.
When I told her to turn off her car, she screamed at me. We argued, and she slapped me across the face.
Greta paused to fume at the memory. She shook her head as though still in disbelief.
I couldn't let her go unchecked. Someone had to stop her. Someone had to make her pay.
I drew in a steady breath. So what did you do? Greta eyed me another long moment and dug her fingers in her ears. I was losing her. She was slipping back into her right mind. I leaned closer and locked my eyes with her. Greta, what did you do? How did you make her pay? Greta's sneer shifted into a cold smile.
I killed her. I took one of her stupid bottles and tried to hit her across the face with it. She dodged it and it hit the car instead. She probably messed herself after that.
Greta laughed.
She tried to run, but I got her. The next swing hit its mark.
It matched perfectly with what Gary said he witnessed. I backed away and stood at Nick's side. His face was white as a sheet. I elbowed his ribs to rouse him. I think we're done here, Nick, I whispered out of the corner of my mouth. Greta blinked hard and shook her head again. Nick flashed me a strange look. He was completely clueless and obviously terrified. Greta's eyes went wide as she realized what she'd just told us. Nick and I crept backwards, but she flew around the counter.
Where do you think you two are going?
I have to get to work. Nick, too, I answered in a matter-of-fact tone.
Oh, no, you're not.
Greta twisted and grabbed one of the trowels from her new display on the front of the counter. As she lifted it above her head, light gleamed off the sharp metal point. She waved the trowel at both of us.
You're not going anywhere.
Nick sprang into action. He tugged on my arm, pulling me back a step, out of the way of Greta's makeshift weapon as she swung it at the spot where I'd just been standing. Magic buzzed in the palm of each hand. I grit my teeth together to keep it in check. Go call the police, Nick. I can handle this. He didn't move. Holly, you can't be serious. I shot him a look. Go, Nick! He stepped in between me and Greta. I reached for the back of his jacket and pulled, but he stood firm. Greta, there's no need for more violence. You've already confessed to one crime. There's no reason to add to the trouble that you're already in. Greta cackled.
No one's going to believe you anyway, Holly. The whole town thinks you're weird.
Well, at least I'll be weird and free. You're going to spend the rest of your life in a little steel box. Nick craned around and shot me a look. The meaning was clear. Back down. My cell phone was in my pocket,
I grabbed it out and dialed the police. A dispatcher answered, and I hurried to explain the situation. "Send the police to Greta's garden. Greta is assaulting my friend with a trowel." Nick lunged forward, knocked the trowel from Greta's hands, and twisted her around so that her arms were pinned behind her. "Please hurry, and make sure Chief Lincoln comes." I clicked off the phone. Greta kicked and stamped her feet. "Let me go, you brute!" "Go, Nick!" I cheered. "Impressive maneuver there." "Thanks." Nick grimaced from the struggle of keeping Greta in his grip as she kicked and flailed. "See if you can find something to tie her up with." I went around to where the ropes were hanging. I grabbed one and quickly unwound it before tossing it to Nick. He held Greta with one hand and used the other to secure her with the piece of braided nylon. "Now, I wouldn't struggle, ma'am. That stuff will burn your skin right off." Greta shouted a string of expletives, and I sighed. So much for remorse, huh? She was obviously a gloater. Nick shrugged. And she seemed like such a nice lady to me. Chapter 26. Sirens wailed in the background, and within minutes, blue and red lights were flashing outside of the large storefront window that was painted with smiling daisies and the store's logo. Nick held Greta's arms to keep her from struggling out of her makeshift cuffs. "Looks like your ride's here," he said, pointing out the window as Chief Lincoln hopped out of his black sedan. He raced into the shop first, weapon drawn, and started barking orders to his deputy, who followed right on his heels. Nick passed Greta off, just as a squad car squealed into the lot. Everything moved in double speed once the police took over the scene. Greta was properly cuffed and escorted out to the waiting squad car. She didn't go quietly. She kicked her feet and screamed at the two officers tending to her. Her shouting was only muffled once they got her in the back seat and shut the door. The deputies came back into the shop and started taking notes. Nick spoke with Chief Lincoln first, and I took the deputies on a tour, explaining how everything played out. When I peeked over at Chief Lincoln, Nick was showing him something on his phone, and I nibbled on my lip, hoping he'd caught every word of Greta's angry confession. When they finished, Chief Lincoln came to take my official statement. He held up his notepad and leveled me with his gaze. "Ollie Bolt." He shook his head, as though still in disbelief. "How in the world did you manage to get so tangled in this case?" "You know, I'm not sure, but I don't know that any other officer I've met has worked a case where the person who finds the body is also the one to wheedle the confession from the killer." I stared up at him, unblinking. "Well, I didn't feel like I had much of a choice, since everything I heard seemed to be implicating my best friend. You know, I still can't believe that after all the time you've known Cassie, you could even think twice that she had anything to do with this." Chief Lincoln bristled. "I don't expect you to understand my job, but I would appreciate it if you didn't presume to know how it all works." I held his gaze for a long moment, and then held up my hands. There was no point in making enemies with the chief of police. I didn't intend on needing his help in the future, but as Nick had once said, there was no benefit in stirring up bad blood when you live in a small town. "You're right. I'm sorry, Chief. It's just that Cassie is the best friend that I've had in a while. Maybe ever. And I tend to get a little protective." He tipped his hat. "Understood. I can respect that, Holly. For what it's worth, I never thought Cassie had it in her to do something like this. But as I said, I have to do my job and see it through to completion, no matter where the clues take me." I nodded. "I can respect that, too." He gave a faint smile. "All right. So let's get down to business, then. Your friend Nick has shown me the recording. I figure that will clear up most of my questions. But what I want to know is why on earth you came over here to question Greta in the first place." I swallowed hard. I still hadn't quite worked up an answer for that one. I glanced behind Chief Lincoln, and saw Greta's empty coffee cup sitting on the counter where she'd left it to ring up Nick's purchase. I smiled to myself and looked back at the chief. Really, Chief, it was just a hunch. Everyone knew that Greta and Peg hated each other. Heck, I've only been here a few months and I knew all about it. They were constantly at each other's throats. I could probably count on one hand the days that Greta and Peg didn't have some kind of squabble. Chief Lincoln nodded along. Nothing I said so far was earth-shattering. He knew the history between the two women just like everyone else in town. I licked my lips and continued. A lot of people don't know this, but Greta used to come into Siren's song and get coffee. But she would always wait for a time when Peg wasn't around. She'd grumble the whole time about Peg, but still she'd show up at least a few times a week to get her fix. But she hasn't shown up since the murder, which felt off to me. So, today, I decided to go over and see why.
Interesting.
Chief Lincoln scribbled a few notes across his pad.
But why bring Nick and have him wear the recorder?
Like I said, I had a hunch she had something to do with it. But in order to get anyone else to believe me, I'd need proof. Nick agreed to help me out. I glanced across the room to where Nick was chatting with the two deputies. Neither of them appeared too eager to book Greta into custody. Not that I could blame them with the noise she was making from the cruiser. Luckily for them, the station wasn't too far away. They wouldn't have to endure her backseat tirade for too long. Nick's shoulders were relaxed, and I smiled at the way his posture mirrored the two men he was speaking with. He fit right in. Chief Lincoln followed my glance.
And he's just a friend.
Why does everyone keep asking about my love life? I shook my head. Yes, Chief. Just a friend. Chief Lincoln chuckled and snapped the leather folio closed over his notepad.
All right, Holly. It was just a question.
He winked and strode across the room to regroup his team. Nick shook hands with all three officers, and they left the shop. I followed them out and saw that a small crowd had spilled out from the neighboring stores. A buzz of whispers went through the crowd as we all exited. I caught sight of Cassie and Frankie standing on the sidewalk in front of the coffee shop. Cassie waved to me, and I sauntered over to them while I waited for Nick to finish up. What in the world happened? Cassie asked once I got close enough. Greta was just dragged out in handcuffs. I looked over at the squad car in the lot and spotted Greta in the back seat, still ranting and raving. She just confessed to killing Peg. Cassie gasped and slapped her hand against her face to cover her mouth.
Seriously?
Frankie frowned at the squad car.
Greta?
I nodded. I don't know how much I can really say, but she confessed and Nick caught it on a recorder.
Wow. You must be one hell of a PI,
Frankie replied, shaking his head with disbelief. I didn't bother to correct him. He didn't need to know that I was actually the one who had questioned Greta. It made more sense that Nick was the one to pull the information from her. I didn't care about getting credit for solving the case. I simply wanted my friend free from the suspects list and the watchful eye of Chief Lincoln. Besides, without Nick there, I might have used Greta's trowel trick on her after that crack about redheads. I smoothed my hand over my ponytail. I'm just glad it's over. Cassie was still covering her mouth, her eyes wide. Cass? You okay? I asked. Tears slipped past her thick lashes and rolled over the back of her hand before she peeled it away. She swallowed hard and nodded. I'm just so relieved. I really thought that I was going to get arrested. I haven't slept since Peg was killed, and they found my shoes in that dumpster. Frankie turned to Cassie and clapped her on the back.
I shouldn't have told them that they were your shoes. I'm sorry, Cass.
She shook her head. No, Frankie, don't say that. I wouldn't have wanted you to lie. He inclined his head.
Well, that's all behind us now, boss lady.
Cassie sputtered a laugh through the free-flowing tears. Wow, this nightmare is really over? I nodded, then wrapped my arms around her shaking shoulders. It's all over, Cass. Thank you, Holly. For what? I asked, smiling into her hair. For never giving up on me. I don't know how you did this, but thank you for whatever you did. I squeezed her tighter. You're more than welcome. Commotion erupted behind me, and I turned to see Nick talking to Chief Lincoln as they stood behind his cruiser. His deputies waved, but their smiles quickly turned to grimaces as Greta thrashed in the back seat of their squad car. They both groaned and pulled open their doors. I turned to Cassie and Frankie. I'll be back later today to check in. I want to talk to Nick for a minute, and I should probably see if Chief Lincoln needs to ask me any more questions. Cassie nodded. I should go to the station later and apologize to him for being so short with him the last few times we spoke. I gawked at her. Cass, how can you even say that? He's been stalking you all over Beechwood Harbor, and up until about 20 minutes ago he was investigating you for a murder charge. Cassie's cheeks tinged a lovely shade of pink. I shouldn't have been so rude. After all, he was just doing his job. I snapped my fingers in front of her dreamlike expression. Cass, you in there? She laughed and batted my hand away. Go see Nick. Tell him to come by later. I'll make him anything he wants, no charge. Frankie laughed. Don't let Philip hear you say that. Cassie hunched her shoulders and looked behind her, sighing when she realized Philip wasn't among those gathered on the sidewalk. I remembered what Greta had said about Philip's history with Peg. No wonder he was in a hurry to get things settled and get out of town as quickly as possible. He probably wanted nothing more than to get away from the place that reminded him of his vicious sister-in-law and their tumultuous past. Okay, guys, I'll catch up with you later. I broke away from the group and gently pushed my way through the small crowd and stood beside Nick. Thank you, Mr. Rivers. This was a job well done, and the BHPD won't forget your service in helping us solve this case, Chief Lincoln said, offering Nick his hand. The two shook hands. Thank you, Chief Lincoln. I hope you'll remember me when you have other cases and need an outside pair of eyes. He handed over a stack of his cards. I laughed softly at Chief Lincoln's expression as he took them. Right, of course. And Holly. He turned his gaze to me, and my heart skittered to a stop. Don't go poking around in any more murder investigations. It's not safe. You could have been seriously injured. Or worse. He obviously had no idea about the gargoyle brawl the other night. Besides, the only reason I hadn't been able to take care of Greta all by myself was because Nick wouldn't leave long enough for me to stun her into next week. I set my arguments aside and offered him an innocent, wide-eyed smile. Yes, Chief. He didn't look convinced. After a beat, he gave a polite nod to us each in turn, slid into the driver's seat, and started the engine. Nick pocketed his hands. Once Chief Lincoln and his deputies were both driving down the road, he turned to me. That was wild. I went over it with the chief at least 3 times, and I still don't know if I fully understand what happened in there. I laughed and combed my fingers through the end of my ponytail. Yeah, me neither. How'd you get Greta to talk like that? I mean, that was something else. I grinned. Call it magic. He laughed. Might as well have been. Well, your whole Gophers bit worked well to distract her. I flashed him a smile. Although I wasn't aware those little troublemakers ventured to second-floor balconies. Nick raised an eyebrow. How do you know I live on the 2nd floor? You been spying on me? I laughed. Don't flatter yourself, Rivers. Your condo address is on your business cards. I figured you had them printed before you moved into your new office. Oh. He looked down at his shoes for a moment. Right. I should probably get those reprinted. Might be a good idea. I nudged him with my elbow. It was a good piece of improv. He laughed. Thanks. But let's not do that again, okay? Deal. Nick considered me for another long moment, an amused smirk twitching at his lips.
So, you're really not going to tell me, are you?
Tell you what?
How you knew it was Greta.
I shrugged. I told you, there was a witness. Nick glanced past me, scanning the crowd.
Uh-huh. And are they here now? I'm sure Chief Lincoln would want to talk to them, too.
I swallowed the lump in my throat. They want to remain anonymous.
Nick scratched his jaw. And how did you find them again?
I cocked my hip. Listen, Mr. P.I., there's nothing to investigate here, so can we drop the 20 questions thing? Nick stared at me for a long moment, his ocean blue eyes searching mine.
Fine. Keep your secrets, Holly.
Thanks. I think I will. I started back down the sidewalk. Oh, by the way, Cassie says to stop by the shop and she'll make you anything you want. On the house.
I just might take her up on that offer. She makes a pretty killer mocha.
Nick laughed, and relief flooded over me. For some reason, he was a hard person to lie to.
See you later, Rivers.
He grinned at me.
Bye, Holly.
Chapter 27. It was shocking how quickly life in Beechwood Harbor returned to normal. Or, at least as normal as it had ever been. Philip Tanner left Cassie in charge of Siren Song and hightailed it home to Idaho. In the week and a half since her promotion, Cassie had flourished, happier than ever without the fear of being arrested for murder constantly hanging over her head. Word on the street was that she also received a large pay bump from Philip to keep things running smoothly so that he didn't have to ever come back to town again. In the end, I pitied the man. He'd lost his wife to a terrible disease, after years plagued by false accusations that couldn't have made their life easy, and then likely spent a small fortune in legal fees, battling his sister-in-law for what was rightfully his. Maybe Greta was right. Maybe Peg really had been all the things she said. Not that I agreed with the way Greta had solved the problem. With my work life back under control, the only thing left to resolve was back at the manor, which was exactly what Posey intended to discuss at the house meeting she organized. On a windy Sunday afternoon, Adam, Lacey, Boots, and I all gathered in the sitting room and waited for Posey to show up. To my surprise, Adam and Lacey were actually being civil to one another, and as I shifted in my seat on one of the tufted chairs, I hoped that Posey would arrive before their temporary peace treaty buckled. Boots was tucked against my legs on the other side of the wide chair, and I glanced down at him. "Boots, can you go up and check the attic?" I asked, stroking his chin. He blinked his amber eyes at me slowly, and then dropped his chin down to rest on his front paws. "So that's a no?" Adam chuckled and pushed off of his chair.
"I'll go see what the holdup is. Why a ghost would ever be late is beyond me. I mean, it's not like she has hair to curl or makeup to put on. You know, all that chick stuff."
Lacey chucked a pillow at his back, and I applauded her throw. "Nice shot." "Thanks." Lacey smiled at me. The sight of it was still somewhat unnerving, but surprisingly, Lacey and I had actually had a few meaningful conversations in the week and a half since she called SPA to rat out Gary for me. Adam laughed and tossed the pillow back before turning to leave the room. "He likes you, you know," she said once he was out of earshot. I squirmed in my seat. Boots grumbled as I shifted against him, voicing his displeasure with a low sigh. I flicked a glance over at Lacey. "Adam St. James likes women. Or was it chicks?" Lacey laughed, but gave me a knowing smile. "I'm just telling you, when he's not insulting me about my pageant work, he's talking about you." I sighed. "Bat wings." She laughed again, the sound like icicles tinkling together. But before she could add anything, Adam pushed the door open again. He was grinning from ear to ear, and I sat up straighter, wondering what in the world had made him so happy. Posey appeared through the door a beat later, and solidified as she settled to the left of the mantel on the large brick fireplace. Adam lowered back into his original seat, still smiling like a fool. I arched a brow at him, but he didn't look my way. Posey cleared her throat to get our attention.
As you all know, Gary got into some trouble with the SPA and was removed from our home a little over a week ago.
Thank goodness, I mumbled under my breath. Lacey added her agreement. Posey continued.
SPA agents have already cleared out his belongings and have located a new tenant to take his room.
I glanced over at Lacey. Wow, that was fast. Adam laughed.
There's never a shortage of misfits in the supernatural world.
Apparently not, I scoffed. Posey glared at us. We were clearly stealing her thunder. Sorry, Posey, I hurried to add. Please continue. She gave a thin-lipped smile.
Your new roommate is a witch, like Holly. Her name is Evangeline Loren.
The doors flapped open of their own accord, and a wand-brandishing witch with raven black hair, sapphire eyes, and a rosy pout came striding into the room. She was dressed in a long-sleeved black dress, made of carefully crafted lace that showed off a startling amount of skin, but strategically covered all of her essentials. I shot a dirty look at Adam. So that's what had him grinning like an idiot.
Good afternoon, everyone,
the witch said, stepping into the center of the room. She smiled wide and revealed a set of perfect white teeth. And it hit me right in between the eyes that I had seen her before. Evangeline Loren was the star of The Wednesday Witch, an insanely popular supernatural soap opera. I resisted the urge to bury my face in my hands. Adam jumped up from his seat and practically tripped over his own feet to get to her.
Let me be the first to welcome you to the Beechwood Manor. I'm Adam St. James, shifter.
I glanced over at Lacey, expecting her to be revolted by Adam just as much as I was. Instead, I found her practically falling out of her chair to race over to Evangeline.
Oh, my stars! You're really her!
Evangeline smiled warmly, holstered her wand in the sleek leather belt around her waist, and extended her hand to Lacey.
I'm assuming you've seen my show. Every episode. At least twice.
I rolled my eyes and pushed up from my chair. I was ready to make my introductions and get off the welcome wagon. I was all for another witch in the house, just not one that had a famous TV show, or that made Adam smile like he'd just won the lottery. Was that really so much to ask? Nice to meet you, Evangeline. I'm Holly Bolt. I'm also a witch. I jerked my chin over my shoulder to the chair I vacated. Boots was already sprawled out over the entire cushion. That's my familiar, Boots. As you can see, he's harmless. Boots looked up at me with narrowed eyes. I could almost hear him reminding me of his part in taking down Gary. Evangeline laughed. The sound a perfect, melodic string of notes. Of course.
My familiar is out flying right now. He's a hawk. His name is Flurry.
Flurry? I repeated. Kind of sounds like an ice cream sandwich or something. Adam laughed at my joke, but Lacey and Posey both shot me cold glares. I shrugged. Can't win them all. I have to get going, but welcome to the manor.
Thank you, Holly. I'm sure we'll find time to chit-chat soon enough.
I nodded, snapped at Boots, which he ignored, and then left the room without him or any of my dignity. A witch that couldn't even control her familiar. I'm sure Evangeline was thoroughly impressed. That night, after a long day spent out in the greenhouse, I came inside long enough to shower, change into my favorite hot pink and pineapple pajama set, and trudged to the kitchen to find something to eat for dinner. Boots was standing guard outside, his furry face twisted into an impatient scowl. He yowled as soon as he spotted me. I know, I'm late. I brushed past him and pushed the kitchen door open. He chased after me, and only relented from weaving around my feet when his bowl was set in front of him. The kitchen was empty, and I went about making myself a hearty bowl of pasta. I needed comfort food. All afternoon, I'd been replaying the way I acted toward Evangeline, and hated myself a little more with each passing hour. There was no excuse for my petty attitude. Why should I care if she was gorgeous, famous, and enchanting? It didn't take anything away from me. Except Adam's attention. But that wasn't something I wanted anyway. Was it? Ugh! I groaned and threw myself down into the chair at the head of the table. I twirled my fork through the noodles, but didn't lift a bite to my lips. I was suddenly not in the mood to eat, despite my growling stomach. I was about to get up and throw the meal into a leftover container and stash it in the fridge when the kitchen door swung open. Adam sauntered into the room and flashed me a wide smile. "Hey, gorgeous." I flushed at the use of his nickname for me. It made my heart race more than I would ever admit to anyone other than myself. "Hey, Adam. You want this pasta? I just made it but decided I don't want it." "Why not?" He leaned over my shoulder and took a deep whiff of the steam rising from the plate. His lips were too close to my ear. He straightened, and I shrugged my shoulders, trying to forget the way his body warmth had enveloped me. "I'm not hungry anymore." Adam sank down onto the chair beside me, took the fork from my fingers, and ate a bite.
That's really good,"
he said around a mouthful of pasta.
"So, gorgeous, what's eating you up?"
"I'm fine." He arched a brow at me. I sighed. "I am, I promise."
"So it has nothing to do with Evangeline moving in today?"
"No." I tried to force a laugh. "Why would you think that?" Adam chuckled.
"Because you were kind of an ice queen to her, and then disappeared for the rest of the day."
I didn't mean to be an ice queen. I stared down at the table, studying the knots in the wood.
"I'm sure it'll be fine. Just say you were stressed out about work or something. No one's judging you. Evangeline didn't even let on that she noticed."
I decided that I hated the way he said her name. I pushed the plate over so it sat in front of him. "Then it's all good." Adam considered me, his expression intent.
"You'd tell me if something was wrong, wouldn't you?"
"Yep." Boots finished his dinner and came over to bash his face against my legs, his cat way of apologizing for his hangry attitude out in the hall. I leaned over and scratched him on the head. The door opened again, and Lacey strode into the room. She was wearing a hot pink mini dress, her hair teased into an impressive bouffant, with heels so high they made my ankles hurt just watching her walk across the kitchen. Adam opened his mouth, apparently struggling to come up with the right barb to throw at her. I silenced him with a dirty look.
"Can you guys even believe that we have a real-life star living here?"
she marveled, clicking over to the fridge. She retrieved a can of her favorite O-positive blend and her crystal goblet.
"I just can't figure out what she's doing here in Beechwood Harbor."
Adam perked.
"She's taking some time off from acting to go back to school."
Lacey and I both gaped at him.
"That's what she told Posey and me after you both left. She's practicing her spellcrafting skills in preparations for a new business venture. I don't know the specifics, just that she needed a quiet place to study and practice away from her busy life in the L.A. haven. So she's here for a few months before shooting picks up again."
Relief flooded through me. She was only going to be here for a few months? Lacey pouted as she swirled the deep red beverage in her fancy goblet.
"That's a downer. A few months isn't that long."
"I don't know if it's really something that can be mastered in a few months," I said. "Spellcrafting is really advanced magic." Wand work in general was notoriously difficult. Few witches could master spellcrafting entirely. Evangeline had already shown a preference for casting with a wand. Most magic could be achieved without it, but with a wand, everything became more precise and intricate. Personally, I couldn't even remember the last time I'd held my own wand. It had probably been a few months. As an elemental, most of my power flowed through my hands, just as if I were using a wand. But there were still spells that required a wand. They just weren't things I needed to do on a regular basis. Besides that, I had a terrible tendency of losing or breaking the darn things. "What else did you learn?" I asked. Adam shrugged. "Not much. She seems nice. Very intelligent." Lacey scoffed and took a long sip from her goblet. "Yeah, like that's what you were assessing. Her intelligence." He smirked at her, perusing her short dress. "Isn't there a pole somewhere missing its vampirus?" Lacey glared at Adam. "Let me guess. You're mad because she already shot you down so hard that you cried a little?" Adam growled. "Not as hard as she's gonna shoot you down the second you try and recruit her for your beauty pageant posse." Lacey snarled at Adam's sarcastic reply. "Bite me, mutt." "Guys, enough," I hissed. "You're giving me a headache." Adam shrugged and went back to devouring my forfeited plate of pasta. Lacey drained the contents of her goblet, wiped the corner of her mouth, and rinsed out her cup. She stalked back out of the kitchen, offering a frosty goodbye as the door swung shut. I turned to Adam and cocked my head. "So did you ask her out?" Adam nearly choked on his bite of pasta. "What? Holly? No." I leaned back in my chair. "Why not? She's very pretty." Adam grinned. "She is, but I have my eye on someone else right now." I raised my eyebrows. "I was hoping we could try another non-date date. And maybe this time we end it together instead of winding up at a crime scene." I laughed at the memory. "I'd like that. I do have a request, though." "What's that?" "You keep your gawking at Evangeline to a minimum until we decide what we're doing." Adam laughed. "I wasn't really gawking." I snorted. "Adam, even I was gawking. I just find it entertaining that I'm the only guy in the manor. It's like these SPA guys have it out for me or something. They're trying to get me killed." I laughed. "I didn't really think about it that way." Adam grinned and leaned forward. "Trust me, gorgeous. You're the only one I'm really staring at these days." I tried to remind myself about the rules, the non-dating, the no-shifters, and the reasons why I'd ended up in Beechwood Harbor in the first place. But it was hard to keep those things in mind with Adam's dark eyes staring back at me. Chapter 28. "Special delivery." Nick's head popped up as I strode into his office. He grinned as I handed him a paper cup from Siren's song. "Mocha?" "Yes, sir. I have these, too," I said, holding up a bag. "Fresh chocolate chip cookies." Mmm. Nick took a drink. "Thanks, Holly. What's the occasion?" "Cassie insisted," I answered. I set the bag of cookies on his desk and laughed as he dove right in, grabbing 3 out in one handful. "She still considers you her personal knight in shining armor and wants to spoil you accordingly." Nick placed the cookies on the desk in front of him and then waved for me to sit down in one of the upholstered chairs opposite his. All of his furniture had been delivered since my last visit, and the place had come together nicely. Nick either had excellent taste or a talented interior designer. His desk was a beastly thing made of glossy, dark wood. The chairs were a nice contrast, a rich royal blue. A large, old-fashioned globe in a wooden frame sat in the corner, beside a large bookshelf made from the same wood as the desk. A few potted plants, knick-knacks, and a row of sleek gunpowder metal filing cabinets completed the space and pulled it all together. "I like what you've done with the place. Very pro." "Thanks." Nick nodded and swept his eyes around the room like he was still getting used to it, too. "Were you on your way out of the shop for the day?" I nodded. "Yeah, today's my short day. So I thought I would drop this stuff off and see how you're doing. Nick smiled and took a bite of cookie. Much better now. I laughed. Right. I'm good. Things are picking up. Chief Lincoln put me in contact with the powers that be around here, and the word about my practice is getting out. What about you? Good, too. Busy with work, mostly. I'm Cassie's right-hand woman now that she's the boss. I'm sure she appreciates having you around. From what I've seen, the two of you make a good team. Thanks. I bobbed my head. So, there was something besides the delivery that brings me by today. I thought there might be, Nick replied. I smiled at him. That's why you're the PI, right? I guess so. He laughed. What's on your mind? It's occurred to me that I owe you something. Is that so? Nick drawled, grinning at me over the top of his laptop. What did you have in mind? The night that we searched Siren's song together, we made a deal. I told you that if you helped me with proving Cassie's innocence, I would let you have one tour at the mansion. Holly, you don't have to do that. Nick waved a hand, dismissing my idea. No, I do. Nick, I made you a deal, and while you held up your end, I didn't hold up mine. I would like to make that right, if you're still interested. He sat forward in his chair. I'm definitely still interested. Okay. Well, like I said, it's a one-time deal. Hopefully that will be enough to satiate your tour group's curiosity. You know, actually, I don't think I'll bring a group. But I would like to see the place if you're sure that would be okay. I smiled. I'm sure. But why don't you want to bring a group with you? I thought that was the whole point. Don't tell me you're too swamped with cases that you don't have time. Nick laughed. In Beechwood Harbor? I doubt my caseload will ever be that full. I kind of hope it stays that way. I laughed. I'm certainly not eager to stumble across another dead body anytime soon. He nodded. Yeah, probably not gonna happen. But you know, long-lost relatives, missing jewelry, cheating spouses, that stuff happens everywhere, even in places like Beechwood Harbor. So I guess you're kind of stuck with me for a while. I smiled and ran my finger along the edge of his desk. I'm okay with that. But seriously, you're sure you don't want to do a whole tour? Yeah. I don't want to subject you to a group of looky-loos on the front lawn. I inclined my head, filled with relief. Sneaking one person into the manor was easy. Thanks, Nick. That's very kind of you. He leaned in. Besides, I think your roommate Adam would chew my face off if I tried. I winced at the expression. Nick had no idea how accurate it actually was. Nick laughed. So when can I stop by? There's a full moon coming up soon. The perfect night for a spooky tour. Works for me. I pushed up from the chair and started back towards the door. Thanks, Holly. I turned back and smiled at him. You're welcome, Nick. I honestly couldn't have done it without you. Likewise. He leaned back in his chair and eyed me, smiling widely. You know, we do make a pretty good team. I might just give you a call the next time I run into a case that I can't crack. I laughed and pulled the door open, motioning to the new lettering on the glass. Careful, or I'll make you put my name on the door, too. On the eve of the full moon, I followed through on my promise and managed to sneak Nick into the manor while everyone was out. Posy was home, but she was up in the attic and had no idea the thing she feared most was happening right under her nose. Literally. I took Nick through the house, stopping at each room to explain the history that had been relayed to me when I first moved in. Nick soaked it all in like a child at a theme park. And I had a feeling the reason he'd forgone the tour idea was so he could see it for himself the first time. If he had a crowd of people to herd along, he wouldn't have been able to personally enjoy any of it. He had a paranormal investigator's kit filled with ghost hunting gear, but shockingly, none of it showed the slightest signs of activity as we went through the house. Not that I had been worried it might. When he'd seen all the main living spaces, we circled back through the house and went out onto the front porch. The night was fairly warm with the summer solstice right around the corner. I was comfortable even without a sweater. "Well, was it all you hoped for?" I asked. Nick smiled. "It's an amazing house, to be sure. But I think you're right, Holly. It wouldn't have made for much of a tour. Maybe it is all just a bunch of fairy tales and make-believe for the delusional and paranoid. I think those are your words." I flushed. "I shouldn't have said that, Nick. I'm sorry." He laughed. "Don't worry about it. I get it. In hindsight, showing up in your rose bushes with a business card and a camera wasn't a smart plan." I glanced over to where the rose beds started and chuckled at the memory of stalking around the corner and nearly stunning Nick on sight. We'd certainly come a long way since then, although he still made me want to stun him sometimes. Nick grinned, and I wondered if he was thinking back to our original meeting, too. "I guess I've just always wanted to believe that there was some big secret, you know? Like ghosts and vampires?" Nick smiled, his eyes sparkling under the porch lights. "Yeah, something amazing and unexplainable." I wasn't sure what to say. I pocketed my hands and shifted my weight back into my heels, rocking slightly on my feet. "I think a lot of people want that." "You don't?" I smiled. "My life is complicated enough, I think." "Fair enough," he chuckled. "Well, thanks for showing me around, Holly." "I would say any time, but, you know," I said with a laugh. Nick smiled. "Right." We walked toward the edge of the porch, and Nick trotted down the steps. He stopped at the bottom and turned back to wave. "Good night, Holly." "Night, Nick." I watched him continue down the drive and wondered what he would say if he knew the truth about me. Never gonna happen, I muttered to myself. When Nick's tail lights disappeared into the night, I went back inside the manor. I might not be normal, but I was starting to think that maybe, by some turn of luck, I'd finally found the one place that could feel normal to me. A place that felt like home.